No, we should still do that. Okay. The issue.
Around the corner. Taking Bill's, taking Mr. Ramsey's seat. Okay, gentlemen, here's my goal. 10 o'clock. Out of here.
When you use the word goal, I'm thinking of the game that started 5 minutes ago. That's where everyone should be.
So let me give you, I made a couple suggestions on
Wait, I sent to Judy.
here's my writing. There's some things if you have a chance.
Oh, good.
Just in terms of,
Hi. How are you?
can't read. I'm just trying to.
Remind me. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Nice.
Been like that today, buddy, believe me.
Oh, you've no idea. I'm with you on that. Where did this typed version come from? Did you do this typed version?
That's what came in the package.
Oh, I didn't even.
Yeah.
What do I know?
No, so I just.
Oh, okay.
No, nothing. I
Well,
don't think there's anything terribly substantive.
I see. Is that it would get us beyond 8 o'clock?
If we do a request with the final certification issue, it's really right for
Site plan, and we're gonna go behind.
they have to address that. I mean, that's, it said that's what.
It's not joint. Her chamber's not a joint.
I didn't know that it wasn't.
There's good reason we should do that.
What does it?
I'll go on that. That's all you have to do. It's just going to be coming in. Are they going to be?
I know. Spread out. It's cozy.
You know, we just been through this with. Correct. So they should be surprised.
Okay.
We'll see if they are.
Okay. Okay. And if they don't want to do that, so.
They'd like to listen.
What?
They'd like to listen to you guys. But what I'm going to motion after this meeting is done, that we break off and do site plan independent, because we just hold you guys up. And some of our questions sometimes bother you guys too. So,
It would be, the only reason I like it is we need to incorporate what we did in our decision.
right.
We need it.
But we would do site plan first anyway.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So why would we?
Well, they don't want to do it.
If they want to listen to us, they can listen to us no matter what.
I know, but we'll, so that's fine. Okay. You want to open? I'll open. All right. Good evening, everyone. Today is Wednesday, May 14, 2014. It is approximately 10 past 7. This meeting of the Planning Board is now called to order. The first item on the agenda is a continuation of the hearing with the ZBA for Global Tower Assets LLC and New Singular Wireless PCS LLC with the petitioners 207-225 Lincoln Street. Planning Board is charged with conducting site plan review in connection with a special permit A2, a special permit A3 parking determination, and the applicant is is applying to construct a multi-user personal wireless service facility consisting of a 120-foot cell tower on land of Anchor Plaza Realty Trust. I would note for the record that at our last hearing, board member Corey was absent. She has notified the chair that she has certified the record and read the minutes from the last meeting and is up to speed on the application, so she's legally allowed to sit tonight.
And on behalf of the Zoning Board of Appeals, it's Wednesday, May 14th, 2014, and this is a continuation of the hearing of Global Tower Assets LLC, a New Singular Wireless PCS LLC, for a use variance from Section 5-E, Paragraph 4, a dimensional variance from the setback requirements of Section 5-E, Paragraph 7D, and a special permit A2 under Section 5E, along with a waiver of the 100-foot maximum height requirement under Section 5E, 7C of the zoning bylaw, and such other relief as necessary to construct a multi-user personal wireless services facility consisting of a 120-foot cell tower on land of Anchor Plaza Realty Trust, located at 207 to 225 Lincoln Street in Residence District A. Okay, I guess how we're going to go before here, the planning board still has site plan review to do, but they're going to hold off on doing that while we discuss the other approvals that are required. It's been a while since we've been here on this one, but we have a request from some of the abutters that I think we should talk about obtaining legal counsel for the board. This is signed by about 15 people. 2, 4, 6, 8, yeah, 14, 15 residential abutters asking if we would reconsider our decision to not retain legal counsel to advise us on the complexities of the Telecommunications Act, et cetera. Any discussion on that, Jen?
Well, I think we've discussed the issue with the zoning administrator, considered the resources that are available to the zoning board, and have made the determination that we can proceed as we have been. And if there's a specific concern people want to raise, we can certainly talk about it. I'm not sure how you want to conduct the hearing, if you want to go to this issue first or proceed.
Well, I thought since this was on the table, we should just sort of handle it and see if we want to do it now, but I'd be willing to wait if we hear something this evening that we think might change our minds.
Well, there's nothing that we would do now other than suspend the hearing to go retain counsel.
Correct.
So I don't think that's on the table.
Okay. So I guess my feeling is, I think we talked about this at one of the first hearing sessions way back when, and I think we feel that we have adequate representation. I mean, it's not our first time reviewing cell tower applications. We do have some familiarity with that.
Yes.
And I think it's my feeling that I don't think we need to retain outside counsel at this time.
I think if an issue presents itself that we are divided on, or that we feel is a nuance or this or that, we always have the right to request legal counsel. We do that as a matter of course on this board when we feel we need specialized legal expertise. So I'm always open to the idea of doing it if it's warranted. I don't know that we have an issue in front of us right now that's been clearly articulated that makes us, want to move in that direction, but I'll keep my mind open, certainly.
I agree, and obviously there's a budget issue, and we're not free to freely spend the town's funds, but to the extent that we are drafting an opinion, for example, and that we are in need of counsel, I think we would certainly look at it. But at this point, I concur with both of you in the assessment. You want to make an announcement in terms of the recordings.
Right. That's true. And I am remiss in not mentioning it, in fact, that we are being recorded here for 2 reasons. One, for cable access for this evening. There's a microphone in front, so when we get to the hearing and presentation portion and accept comments from the public, please come up to the microphone. And we'll also record our proceedings as a matter of course under the requirements of state open meeting law. So I guess what we should do is we continued this in order to get some revised radio frequency engineering test results. And I think it's probably appropriate to hear from the applicant to summarize that, and hear from our consultant, and we'll take it from there. So, Counselor, if you'd like to just bring us up to date.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, for the record, my name is Earl Wall, and I represent the applicant. I think as a matter of housekeeping, I have a number of documents that I'm not sure that have been submitted to the board in hard copy. I think that my office has emailed all these to you. These are the documents that have been prepared by Michael Lawton, our engineering. Okay, yes. So I have Michael Lawton here from SAI, who prepared all of the engineering study documents. I also have Andrew LeMay from North Star Consulting, who prepared the real estate consultant report. Stephen Kelleher, outside real estate consultant for Global Tower. Jesse Marino, as you know, project engineer. Jackie Swenson, agent and outside consultant for AT&T. So
Yeah,
it looks as if you might have everything, but maybe
Yeah.
you want to check afterwards.
Sure.
Well, actually, I think we should check it now,
Yeah, we should
because to
make
the
sure.
extent that there's information that has not been presented to the board or to our expert advisor, we want to make sure we're aware of that now.
Yep, got it. So nothing since March. These were filed March 19th at the last status update hearing.
All this is drive tests, CW drive tests.
Yep, yep. We have them, but,
have everything.
yeah. I mean, it's just maps and the report, yep. To get
Emily,
this.
do you have copies that are stamped as having been received?
Yep. Yeah, right there.
Okay.
March 19th. Okay, sure.
I think there were some documents that were just done today, just finalized and were sent over.
They were not sent to the board. I understand they may have been sent to our consulting engineer.
Okay. There are a couple zip files, there's some additional information that Mr. Grafe had asked with regards to coverage if the church was active, if there was and that stuff was just completed and submitted today. It was submitted to Mr. Grafe today, but he's unfortunately not had the opportunity, to look at that.
Just for the record, they were sent to me in a format that I could not open nor read, and they were sent to me at 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Okay.
Well, I guess we should have a discussion, because part of the reason for delay was to make sure that records were submitted, we had information on time, so that we could actually reach resolution. And I'm concerned to hear that we do not, that this board does not have the information that you would like to rely on at the meeting this evening, and that our expert wasn't provided that information ahead of time.
If I may, I think this was maybe you can help me, Michael. This is a request that came from your expert, I think.
Yeah, Mike Lawton, SAI Communications, here on behalf of AT&T.
Mic, please. Use the mic, please.
Sorry. The reason that the plots were only just done on Monday was because we were holding off. The church site was only recently approved, and it's actually not completely functionally on the air yet. The UMTS part of the site is on the air, but the LTE is not. I was holding off, hoping that the LTE could be commissioned, but there's actually a functional issue with the antenna that they've been troubleshooting this week. And the hope is that the LTE portion of the site will be on the air this week. But on Monday, I sent someone down to drive the area, collect the information on the UMTS portion of the site that is on the air, because we couldn't wait any longer. We had to have something. So that's why these exhibits are the drive test was done on Monday, the processing was done yesterday, we finished them up last night.
When did you receive the request from the expert?
It was in response to the first set of plots that we did was for a CW drive test, which is a simulation drive test of using a crane at the site location. Those were done, and at the same time we did actually it was a day later, when we did the CW simulation of the site, we also drove around and collected the existing network. At that time, the church was not on the air, but Mr. Grafe made note, I believe last week, that since the church was now on the air, it would be good to have data showing the coverage from the church. And as the church is not actually completely on the air, it's partially on the air, we did what we could. So.
Okay, thank you. So, a recent request.
If I may just observe to clear the record on that, about the timing of that.
Sure, Mr. Gates. Yep.
Did you want to
You have to do
speak?
it right now.
You speak right now, that'd be fine.
Yeah, but thank you.
Your boards, through Emily, And by the way, for the record, my name is Ronald Grafe. I'm your independent radio frequency consulting engineer. Chairman Freeman and Chairman Ramsey and the boards, thank you very much. By the way, thank you for arranging the meeting so that it would fit in with my schedule of Woburn yesterday, Hingham today, and Paxton tomorrow, and then home. Just with respect with the timing, on January 1st, I sent a letter to you regarding an application that was before the Zoning Board of Appeals with respect, I'm sorry, wrong date. Yeah, I do make mistakes. It's January 1st. Third report. Yeah, it was January 1st. Right. Regarding a facility that was going to be at 1 Lincoln Street, which was a church, I think, the church in question, or a nearby church.
Correct.
And in that report was an affidavit by an engineer named Mr. Marino, who submitted propagation plots of the site, calculated propagation sites, and pointed out specific issues about the site. I raised the issue that those propagation plots should have been included, since they were done, in the original theoretical application. Remember, the first application you saw was not drive tests. It was overlaid, calculated plots.
Right.
And I said, since that's there, and notwithstanding whether it's on or not, it's a planned site or it's not a vapor site, you're going to build it. Let's see the plots overlaid to see the impact on that, and that's what I asked for.
So that would be a simulated.
Right. And it was
not
only restated in that response, oh, by the way, where is it?
Right.
And if you look at the record, my report regarding this meeting was done in March. And I received the report just before I came to before this meeting to get this report to you on, I think it was May 7th that I prepared the report. So I was wondering what happened between March and May, that they already had the information, being that it was prepared in conjunction with that application, which you decided you didn't have to do, or it was a variance of a generator or something. But that was in the record, and I asked for it to be here. So to characterize this as, oh, by the way, it was just in that last request, is not true. It's been an open issue for the entire time. And I'm delighted that you're going to see it, but once again, this afternoon at just about 4 o'clock, I got an email from Elizabeth Thompson, the other attorney. By the way, here's something, but it was in a file that was zipped, and an iPhone doesn't open a zipped file. So I'm as anxious to see it as you are.
Could you explain to us why this is important?
Because that site could provide coverage to the area to the southeast, where a gap does remain, although not an easily identifiable gap. I'll call it an area of reduced signal strength in your municipality. And it appeared from what I saw in Mr. Marino's report that that site, albeit small, was going to do something to ameliorate that low signal strength in that area. And it was important to see them all blended together to find out what the ultimate signal strength is. One other thing about this last bit. The entire case has been based upon, if you look at the evidence that you just received, UMTS coverage. That's the quote-unquote Generation 3, or whatever we want to call it, or GSM, UMTS. They're all similar, not LTE. Now, he just said, well, the LTE wasn't on. Who cares? This case is not about LTE. It's about UMTS. And if UMTS was on, it should have been measured in a timely fashion and submitted with the application. So I have to object again, the fact that couching this is that it wasn't on the air so we couldn't do it isn't quite true, because the system that they're talking about was on the air.
And the second point is, whether or not it was on the air, the simulation was available.
Still
for
existed,
months.
correct.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
But the simulations, I will give them this point, and this is a confusing issue in evidence that you'll see. The simulation was done by Mr. Marino. Am I doing his name correctly? I don't want to have, for the record, his name. Eagleson was the first one. Marino, yeah. Joe had Marino. He may have used an internal AT&T tool as opposed to SAI using their tool. I don't have any evidence on that. In other words, the way they calculate this expected propagation. I don't know that. Maybe we'll find out tonight. That would be the only area of question was the tool that Mr. Marino used, the same tool as Mr. Lawton has used.
And if the tools were not the same, would that affect the internal compatibility of these two?
Depending on how the tools and models, how the models are, the models were tuned, and how they were utilized with what variables,
Right.
indeed, it could show different coverage.
Yep, thank you.
And the fact is, one of the things that you should never do in any application is to have dueling models. Because I could come in with my model, and I could say to you, my model shows coverage better than theirs. Well, who's right? Well, my assumption is they're right because it's their system and it's their model. But if there are two models in their system,
Which one do we use?
which one?
Right. Okay, thanks.
Okay? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr.
I will not talk anymore until later.
Thank you, Mr. Ritz. Okay, Counselor, sorry, if you could,
Mr. Chairman, certainly Mr. Grafe had enough information to issue his report, prior to this meeting, and the report is filed on May 7th. I think that Mr. Lawton was attempting to explain, why that last part of the test was not done that was requested by Mr. Grafe. Certainly, if you'd like, Mr. Lawton can present and respond to this report and questions from the board, and can talk about the coverage from the church. So,
okay, hold on for 1 second. I think what I'd be interested in is seeing how this supplemental information demonstrates the significant gap that we're talking about and clarifies, or that they are saying they have in this area.
So this is, let's
That supports
get
that.
let's get to the big picture result of where we think we are right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, hold on 1 second, because we want to see.
Oh, so people can see. Do you have an issue about being able to see the?
Being able to hear.
Well,
There's echo going on behind us.
Yeah, we'll make sure people get up to the microphone. I don't know what we can do, if anything, about the echo.
I'm not sure if your mic is working, Joe. I can hear the echo from the other mics with Todd and Joe.
Move it closer.
I don't know if your mic is working.
Testing 1, 2. Sounds like it is.
Is it?
Yeah.
Sounds like it is, yeah.
Do you want to move up to the front row? Would that be helpful?
Well, all of us can't hear.
When you speak into that microphone, people have to speak into it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good point. If people are having trouble hearing in the back, please let us know. We're going to attempt to speak more clearly into the microphones, and hopefully that will take care of any issues.
Sorry, I'm going to do this a little multimedia here because to me...
Oh, just 1 second.
Yeah.
We just had a request that
Yeah.
you speak into the microphone
I'm
so
sorry.
people can hear. So
I'm sorry.
if you need to raise it
Yeah, if you
or
need to
whatever,
raise it.
just make sure that you do that.
So I'm going to use multimedia here because to me, the colors on that plot,
Can people hear?
when it's shown on a computer, the two colors are not completely differentiable, but when we printed it, it's the exact same plot. It's much clearer to see. So.
Okay. If you want to carry that microphone with you, I think that's acceptable.
Okay.
The cord should be hopefully long enough.
So,
Want to get an easel for him.
so as I think you can see, there's, it's hard with two things
Yeah.
here.
We're going to try to get you an easel.
They're very different to look at to to me, the colors are more obvious on the paper than on the computer
I would say
screen.
the colors are better. It's more difficult to see just because
Yeah.
it's smaller in size.
sure. Yeah, and I'm sorry about that. I mean, when we did it on the computer,
Yeah.
it just, it's just part of.
I actually think we can, Boyd,
I think we can see that.
do you think the screen's okay?
Yeah.
It's fine for me from here.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
if we can just go with the screen, I think it's better for everyone else to see, and you can certainly use that as a guide.
All right. What is the date of this evidence?
So what we did was, as a result of the questions about what the church covered,
Karen.
Just, yeah.
we went out, excuse me, Monday and did a drive, and you can see this is the route that was driven. This is the church site in the center of town. This is the proposed site. That's the existing site on the smokestack, also in Hingham. And there's actually two plots. We collected the actual signal strength of the UMTS network, both on the 1900 frequencies and on the 850 frequencies. And you can see this is the, it's noted as cellular, which is the 850 frequencies. I can also show you the one for the 1900. Let's see that one. You can see that one is, we plotted it at the three thresholds, or at two thresholds that define what AT&T considers acceptable coverage for their network. Neg 74 is what they consider acceptable coverage.
Could you maximize that for us on the screen?
Sure. Better?
Yes, thank you.
So Neg 74 is what they consider acceptable coverage for UMTS referenced outdoors, but for use indoors. So it's including a fade margin or a building penetration margin over Neg 82, which is a coverage level that is considered by AT&T to be acceptable for UMTS in a car. There's 8 dB difference between the penetration loss for the car to penetration loss for a typical building. Not every building will fall into that category. Some will be less, some will be more. It's an average, but that's how propagation models will work. So this is data that's collected in the same fashion as the data that was provided in the previous report, which was collected, this was collected this Monday. The previous data, I'm trying to remember the exact date, but it was several months ago that test was done. So you'll see when you look at this coverage here from the smokestack, black is insufficient coverage throughout that area. There is some scattering of coverage here. What we found was coverage from, in fact, sites across the water, Revere, Dorchester, Winthrop. One of the things about RF signals is they don't respect the water and they don't stop when there's intervening water. So you get a lot of scattering of coverage. I drove around up there today, and in fact, as you drive around the hill here and come back on Cushing Avenue, this is exactly what I saw. Signal's great here. You come down here, it's no good because as you're on the point, you have good visibility to the wind turbines and Hull and all across the Mass Bay, but when you turn this corner, there's very limited visibility because you're obscured by the hill here and the surrounding buildings. So this is basically the coverage situation today, or Monday, would be the same today, for UMTS, and shows the coverage for the church site being on the air. We tried to duplicate the drive route from the previous drive test as exactly as possible, so that we had sort of apples to compare to apples, because basically what this is showing is that at 1900 megahertz, the church is not providing any useful coverage to the area of need, which is up here. It's providing, obviously, quite a bit of useful coverage in this area, which would not exist without the church, but I think it's pretty clear that the church being so low is not going to impact the need for the site up there. And here's obviously the 850 looks better. When we went into the data, what we found with the 850 was we got even more scattering. Most of this coverage up here is not, in fact, from any of the local sites. So what would happen as a user, if you're a mobile user, you could be on one of any number of about 10 sites across the water on the North Shore or throughout Dorchester, Quincy, where there's clear line of sight to there with no obstruction from land. As you drive around, you'll lose that, you'll get the back, you'll lose it. So even though it shows somewhat acceptable coverage, it's not, for a mobile user, not usable coverage. And then for a stationary user who's going to be in their house, what you're going to have is a situation where as people start to use data, which is becoming more and more of a need, and is in fact why AT&T and Verizon, and among others, are going to LTE to provide people faster data. Most of the data users are in the house. We don't like people driving around using data. That's not safe. So that when you're in a house, you're going to have additional loss from the house. Those are pretty dense houses. And my belief is that the 8 dB of loss, in addition to the fact that it's propagation across the water, would make it difficult for people in this area to use data in their homes on a consistent basis. Maybe on the upper floors it would be fine, but some of the lower floors it would not be good. So this is what we collected. Again, the tests of the two frequencies were done concurrently in the same vehicle, the same time, same measurement setup as the previous test. The only difference here is we didn't do any CW simulation of the proposed site here because it had already been done.
Is it fair to say that if you did do the simulation, everything would be green?
If we did, you mean a computer prediction?
Yeah. I mean, this is the result of a drive test
Right.
without the proposed site.
Yep, and we did do that. We also did whoops. No, what have I done? So if you think back to what we looked at for the drive test, here's the prediction for the situation with this site on the air, which it's not, and this site on the air, which it now is, that site on the air, which it now is, or it has been for some time. Without that, without the existing site, would look like that. And in fact, one of the things we did was this is again 1900. I'm sorry, I didn't maximize it. We correlated it, and it looks quite correct at 1900. The footprint at 1900 of the church is confined down here, the footprint at 1900 of the smokestack is confined over there, and it's not a whole lot in between. And that when we look at the 1900 drive test, we saw that. One of the things we saw when we did the prediction for 850, turned off, is that, like I mentioned, the scatterings from the sites across the water are not showing up as much here as we saw them in the measurements. The reasoning behind that is because propagation models, frankly, don't do a good job of predicting coverage over water. There hasn't been a really good one yet, and I've worked with many, many different propagation models. They do great. You can get a good match between coverage on land with measurements, but one of the things I worked on the AT&T network 15 years ago. One of the things we had real big problems with was, this was back in the day before having thousands of sites, we had 18. We had huge problems with the taller sites on the North Shore, even in Gloucester, interfering with sites down here in Hingham, and as well, the smokestack, which is one of the taller sites in the network, it would propagate across the bay, and we'd see signal from the smokestack, Logan Airport in Winthrop, all along Revere. So and that's not something that you can force a propagation model really to show effectively. So you kind of have to just rely on the drive test data to tell you whether it's there or not. And when we started digging into the drive test data at 850, what we found was, like I mentioned, even though the coverage is good in this area, it's coverage from 15 different sites, and therefore it's not going to provide effective use in this area. Where the 1900 megahertz, you don't see that significant propagation across the water, so the 1900 megahertz drive data in that area is nowhere near as strong. I hope that explained it and I didn't lose everyone.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did, thank you.
Have any more questions?
Any gentlemen?
I'm sure you will, but
Well, are you finished your presentation, or are you?
I was kind of responding to the question. I didn't have sort of a canned presentation since I kind of came into this in the middle. I think there were plots done, there was presentation done, and when I picked up the project, it was in response to some questions that were raised by Mr. Grafe. So we're trying to work through any questions that he has or you have or anyone has about what the need is and some of the testing that we've done, simulations that we've done, that sort of thing.
I know you came in the middle, and you were introduced, but I didn't get your name.
Mike Lawton.
Mike what?
Lawton, L-A-W-T-O-N.
And do we have your resume or curriculum of you to submit it?
You know, you don't, but I can provide it.
If you can just tell us, we will need it for the record, but
Yep.
just what your background is?
So I've been working in wireless for 25 years. I started out working for a company based in Virginia. It was the pioneers in wireless engineering, LCC, and I worked for them for 16 years. While working for them, I designed the first Nextel network in Los Angeles, designed the first Nextel network in New York, built both of those networks, then went to France and worked on GSM network in Marseille, built out that network, came back here, worked 12 years for AT&T in this market. When I started, we had 8 sites, I believe, to cover all of Boston, and I was responsible for the entire network. Over time, I think when I left working for AT&T through LCC, we had gotten to probably 250, 300 sites. It was just before the merger of Cellular One and AT&T to create Singular. When that happened, they started rolling out UMTS. I took a position to lead the UMTS design team for Singular on a national basis. So I designed and oversaw the designs of all the UMTS networks for AT&T in the Midwest, on the West Coast, and the Southeast. And then, what do I do after that?
Well, could you, actually, I'd hope to hear what your educational background was.
I went to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute,
And what
double E,
A degree?
MSEE. So,
Counsel, you'll get his resume to us for the record? Thanks.
yes, I
Yeah. Okay.
Did you have any more questions at this time, or?
I think we want to hear from our
Yeah,
expert.
right, yeah. I don't. Mr. Grafe, any? Just a quick. You summarize it for us.
No.
Yeah.
I can't.
No.
Can I put this down?
Please.
So if I'm undoing it, can I do this? What? Hello, can you hear me now? See, I don't think this microphone works.
I think it does. I
The
heard-
microphone was working.
Yeah.
Try me now.
Yep.
Is that working?
Yep.
Great, okay.
Good.
Just as an aside, when I first began working with you and went to your first meeting and prepared a report in November, shortly after that I went to the hospital with a bleeding ulcer, something that I've never had, and I've never been sick a day in my life, and I can only attest that to what I've been seeing at these hearings and how it eats me up inside when I see evidence that's just incredible. So with that summation, I'd like to begin with what you've seen just now. Could we possibly go back to this first drive test that you did at 850 megahertz? You know how to get there. Please direct yourself to your evidence package that you have that Mr. Watson prepared. That shows the overlaid drive tests on calculated coverage. No, yeah, that's the one. And first of all, by the way, when this first began, Mr. Eagleton, do you remember him?
Yes.
Okay. The entire application was pitched on 850 megahertz coverage.
Yes.
That they didn't have good cellular coverage in the area, and now it's expanded to PCS. So I'm not sure how you want to view that. I'm sticking with 800 because that's where it began. If they want to amend their application to do that, that's fine with me. But I am addressing 850 megahertz UMTS. Look at the scale on that map. Green, greater than or equal to minus 74 dBm. Yellow, greater than or equal to minus 82 dBm. Black, less than minus 82 dBm. Look at the evidence. Green, minus 75 dBm. Well, wait a minute, that's a dB weaker. Yellow, minus 95, or blue, minus 85 dBm. Oh, that's 3 dBm weaker. And yellow, minus 95. Well, we don't see that here. We've given up on that, and that's okay. We'll just do 2. Inconsistent evidence. They've changed the presentation. The analysis that I did was at these plots, not at this, and those signal levels, these were the ones that I've seen in all the other cases for AT&T. We've now increased the level that we need to do this. Now, is it a big deal? Well, not a terribly big deal, but it is a deal because the evidence is inconsistent. What is the signal strength? Is it minus 82 or is it minus 85? And what if it's minus 86? Does that still work? Well, we haven't gotten into issues like that, but the fact is, the drive test and overlay that you have here don't agree with this. So I'm not sure what purpose this shows, except one thing. In the 850 megahertz system, whether you look at this map or whether you look at this map, there are no significant gaps in coverage. There aren't any. Show me any black dots. Oh, I see one. I see here. Why didn't I come on? Oh, wait.
You have your laser?
Yeah, I brought it. And I promise I won't shoot you.
While you're looking for your laser, can I ask a question?
I'll try to talk to you from my back. Yes.
That's fine.
Here I am.
What's been submitted here is 800 megahertz, and you refer to 850. At least, is there a difference in
That's
that?
interesting. We have this huge, in Paxton, there's this huge inconsistency because they say 850, but then they show 700. And indeed, those are different bands. 850, 800, the frequency band that the cellular system operates is basically from 800 and change megahertz, depending on which band you are, whether you're the A-band carrier, the B-band carrier, the AT&T or who is it up here? The other guys, the non what? Verizon, right. They have different bands, but it basically goes almost up to 900 megahertz, 896 or something. So it depends on which one. So you can call it 850 or 800.
So we can use these interchangeably?
You bet.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so that would show, oh, look at that. There's a black dot there. 1 pixel. Insignificant data. Couple there. That is a couple more, but because the threshold now is minus 82 and not minus 85, hey, those could be at minus 83. They'd be pretty good, wouldn't they? There is no gaps here. There aren't any, no significant gaps. You go to the 1900 megahertz, yeah, there are, but this whole application to you has been pitched at 850 megahertz. I'll go back to my notes. Could we go back to the existing coverage now?
That's the drive-through that shows existing.
This is the drive test.
Yes.
This is
Okay,
existing,
that's right.
right.
And then I want to talk about something else.
Right.
Okay. This is the way the coverage exists today. And Mr. Lawton has said, well, they have determined that this stuff is coming from somewhere up here. Well, number one, it doesn't cost anymore to make the call from a cell site that's somewhere else. Granted, it may not be an adjacent cell site, but the radio will still work. The radio will still ultimately hand off. The issue that you have that I talked about in my report is even compounded when there's a site so close with significant overlap. See this green? And then when you see it from the other site, we'll get into that later. Doesn't cost anymore. And this argument that, oh, well, the data may not work, there's no evidence substantiating that. There's a connection made to a cell site, no matter where it is. And indeed, he's right when he says in the early days, when AT&T merged with the company that I built, we had only 12, 13, 14, and they were called big trunkers. They covered miles and miles because it was an early system. And so sometimes you were talking on a cell site that was 15 miles away. Did it matter? No. Today, it matters a little more, but the fact is, there aren't any gaps, significant gaps in coverage. But it gets more interesting when you look at, can I see the coverage proposed from this site? I want you to remember that. And can we see the coverage proposed from this site at 850? Oh, I'm sorry.
The simulated coverage.
The simulated coverage.
Assuming that your cell proposal.
No, I'm all confused.
Yeah.
Same picture, but
Without-
not drive data, but prediction.
Without the site.
Yeah.
Is this with the site or without the site?
That's without.
That is without the
That's
site,
without.
because that's
Okay,
actual.
Can I see it with the site?
No.
We can't test what's not there.
You have CW drive tests. You overlaid them on the other maps.
Right,
So,
but they're not.
okay, so let's do the calculateds. Let's do the calculateds then. You got the calculateds. You've got calculateds of the existing site the way it is, and calculateds of the system it'll be when this site is on the air. You just showed those a couple of minutes ago.
Yep.
Those are the ones that look like blobs. Those are the ones
Right.
that you allegedly overlaid here.
Right,
These things where you see the big sea of green.
right.
With the, at 850,
Yeah, but with and without. Yeah, show me without first.
but at 850.
Yeah, and we're only going to talk about 850 from now on. Okay. That's the way it exists today. Is that right? Okay. So this is what Mr. Lawton was talking about, that what he said, and this was interesting, and very curious to me, by the way, that all of this coverage was coming from some site over here. Well, typically, when one models sites in a particular area, you only model the sites that you're concerned with. You don't model the rest of the world, because I really don't care what a site in Connecticut is doing, so why would I model that? Where does this model stop? You typically model what you're interested in. So I would need explanation how it can be determined that that's coming, because we'd have to do something called a best server. And they would have to identify which server, which cell site, was providing that coverage. They can do that in drive tests. I'm not sure they can do it in calculated like this. So I question, because I don't have enough information to tell you, that indeed that coverage is coming from over here. It's not clear that it may not be coming from here. I don't know. And I'm not sure it matters, because, as I said, it doesn't cost any more to make the call. Could we see it now with the proposed site? Even with the different coverage levels, those are gaps. The coverage did not significantly improve on this peninsula, or whatever this is out here. And if you'll recall, the search dot that you first saw, and see, in fact, it's on these maps. I never did see a search ring, nor did you. But the search dot is up here, because AT&T recognized that's where they had their gap in coverage. And where are they providing coverage? Down here. Now, this is something I'll get into my report. I'm just dealing with what we're dealing with right now. When you look at the proposed site, and then you look at the church now, and you look at this, at the greater signal strengths, we almost have, and I don't know what's in here. Is that a swamp? I don't know. Yeah. But I look along roads, and I see nearly seamless coverage, minus 82 dBm, in vehicle coverage, in suburban house coverage, along these roads. Show me the gaps. They're there, yep. Now, these are clearly gaps on roads. This site isn't filling those gaps, because it's in the wrong place. And this evidence further supports that. But it doesn't support it even more, because they've changed the thresholds. And you can't have two sets of evidence in one hearing. I mean, no matter what happens to this thing, when anyone takes it on later, and when you do hire counsel, or they hire counsel, the judge is going to say, wait a minute, there are different signal strengths. And I'm going to get that in the record now to show we have inconsistent evidence, and it's difficult to make such a decision.
Okay.
And one final thing about this that I didn't bring up in my last report to you. If indeed now AT&T is going to justify this site on 1900 megahertz, that's the higher band that has the really, really bad coverage. Remember the proposed towers got the 12-foot arms with the 4 antennas per sector?
Right.
Okay. Well, they don't need that if they're just filling PCS sites. As I was driving in today on Route 282, is that what it is?
228.
From
228.
What?
228.
Whatever that road is that comes
Main
from
Street.
Route 3, which I called 93, okay? There was, on the hill, I saw a monopole. It was a stealth flagpole. So Emily here kind of got me a list. And in your town, you already have 2 stealth flagpoles. And they're PCS flagpoles. You notice that there's no arms sticking out. They're just nice, slender devices because the antennas are put in internally. If AT&T has demonstrated, and they may very well have, a 1900 megahertz coverage gap, they could fill such gaps with much simpler structures, without the big 12-foot arms, without 4 8-foot long antennas on each arm. 12 antennas, 4 8-footers is what it takes to do that when you're doing cellular and PCS. You don't really have to do that because, by the way, in the church, they're using one antenna that transmits all the frequencies because they can't fit anything else inside the dome. Anything is possible electrically, just about anything. I can't do some things, but some things you can. So I know I'm kind of, it's this. I'm kind of rambling here trying to answer this before I get into my official report. of what I just sent you, or what you have. But basically, the information tonight has presented nothing to me that is going to help because of the inconsistencies in the evidence.
Question. Is it a fair question to ask what should the gradations in DBM be in terms of the levels? You're right, we don't have consistent performance standards across these two things. Is there a performance standard that we should, or different, is it 82 to 74, or is it 85 to 70? I mean, is there a standard that you would advise us that would be an appropriate and consistent standard, or sets of gradations of DBM that we should be focusing on, perhaps asking the applicant to model?
It is not my job nor your authority to set the signal levels for the carriers.
Right.
The carriers set their own signal levels. The only caveat there is, number one, they should be consistent. And typically they're not. They tend to tailor them to fit the application that they're doing. I'm hearing a lot at -85. I hear this one now at -82. And remember, it is not a brick wall. That's the important part. It's not a brick wall, because even though they say -82, if they did bins, as we had requested, smaller bins, originally we saw 10 dB bins, and I asked for smaller ones, but we never got them. At -86, it's going to play probably just as well. At -87, it's probably going to play nearly as well. There's no evidence showing that at -87 a call's not going to go through. But as far as setting the bins, in fact, this came up last night in Woburn. That board asked for specifically data now on how the signal level tapers off in each bin, because the chairman of that board wanted to see, well, how bad does it really get? Because this evidence, they say, remember, a gap now is anything that's less than -82. Well, it used to be, and it still is, on the street, -93 or -95. And remember, these are logarithmic scales, so we're talking about signals that are 10 times weaker. Now, I'm not saying that -93 or 95 works in a vehicle. If it does, it'll be spotty. But what I am saying is that that is not a brick wall, and while they set that, good. But let's be consistent in how they set it, because how can I compare moving evidence? And how can you evaluate moving evidence? Part of the problem here. And I've tried to have, as I say in my report, consistency is a virtue. And it really is when you're trying to evaluate these things. But notwithstanding that, this evidence shows you that the site as proposed, even at cellular, doesn't take care of the gaps in their system.
One of the things that struck me from their drive model, or the drive results from Monday, is what I'll call the offshore signal that seems to be coming. And I am wondering whether or not that suggests that there are alternative locations that they should be looking at for placement of a cell tower that would in fact service what they might perceive as a gap. Basically, on the right side of the map, they look to the left. Is there anything to the right that may have serviced it?
Well, unfortunately, I had a lot of time on my hands today as I arrived this morning, so I drove the entire area, and I didn't get all the way out to the point. It was kind of a long drive. But I did look at and try to figure out, quite frankly, I don't know what's over here. I don't know if that's just a bay or the Atlantic Ocean or whatever it is. There may be something relatively close.
Yep.
Typically, the cell site should be located within a reasonable distance, not too close and not too far. And remember, in our very first application, Mr. Eagleton talked about the regular reuse grid, on how sites should be spaced nice and equally. And he said that a couple of times. So to put one out here probably doesn't make sense, even though some signal is leaking in. And I am not suggesting that, not at all. I'm suggesting that a site should be put where the coverage problems really are. And as I'll talk to you later, when you look at these reports, even with different signal strengths, I want to try to show you what I see as another flaw in the site at this location.
Okay. Did you want to go through your report then of May 7th?
If you don't mind.
Sure. I think that would be helpful, because that's, that would help us understand.
This is my report to you dated May 7th of this year. And in that I begin that I am receipt on this day, May 7th, a readable response to my previous comments with request to support the applicant's application by Michael Lawton of SAI. And it appears he's referencing issues noted in my January 1, 2014 and my November 4th letter to your board. And it says it consists primarily of the results of CW, that's continuous wave. Those are the drive tests from the site as proposed, performed by the applicants on December 31st. And that's, quite frankly, that's also, and I'll be very honest to the applicants, that's the very best time to do these to show coverage. Indeed, the coverage will deteriorate a little bit as the leaves come out in the summertime. So, typically you like to do these in full leaf, maybe July, but they're still very good tests. And what I did is I talked about everything. On page 4, he talks about, I had asked about clutter to make sure they were using the right clutter, and he goes on to note that it's proprietary to AT&T. It would not be useful without the use of an identical tool. I didn't propose to utilize his clutter. I just wanted to make sure that the models were indeed based upon good tuning. In fact, last night in Woburn, we saw the AT&T's clutter, and we saw Verizon's clutter, and indeed it demonstrated that they were working in a dense urban area, and the clutter map showed, and Attorney Duvall will remember this too, it shows areas of very dark red, meaning dense, and then there was an area that I said, gee, I don't know what that is, it must be a forest, and they said yes, because it showed, so we knew it was good. So he said he doesn't want to show that. Okay. And why I say it's generally true, I was just looking to make sure. But he goes on to say that such data were requested support for the record the accident calculated. But now AT&T suggests that the network drive data and CW drive data as requested for evidence submission in this matter are included herein would be a much more accurate and valid means to assess the situation on the ground. These drive data can now be used as the basis for the application justification. And what I was saying there, to avoid confusion in your review, if they have disavowed now the use of calculated and want to stick with drive, fine. It further complicates an ultimate review of this by a third party, whether we're going to base this on drive test, we're going to base it on calculated coverage. But it does sound like that they want to give that up. Notwithstanding that, though, I did find good correlation. And you saw the correlation just now between what the calculated propagation is and what the scan drive data is. That's the one that has the sites coming in from outer space over there. It's I'm not certain, and the applicants can decide what they want to stipulate. It doesn't matter to me. One variable works best than two. He then goes out, when I asked about the search ring, because I've asked many times to see the search ring, and once again, last night, because it was fresh in my mind, AT&T had a nice little round search ring, a circle, with the site conveniently right in the center of the search ring. That was good. And Verizon had this irregular shaped thing that we called an irregular polygon, and their site was kind of in the corner, but notwithstanding, it was in the search ring. We'd never seen a search ring. So I had to assume then that dot that you see on the map, and by the way, that's, if you look on, now, oh, by the way, these weren't numbered.
Right.
So I asked to have them numbered, and they weren't, so I just got the number tonight, so I'll go over it. The first one says, Hingham map, existing coverage versus existing coverage drive test, 800 megahertz CW.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one.
Okay.
Okay. Then Hingham map, existing coverage with 1900 CW, right?
Yep. Is that 2?
That's 2.
That's number 2.
Excuse me. 3, proposed coverage of drive test results 80 feet, 800 megahertz CW.
Yep.
4, proposed coverage drive test results 80 feet, 1900 megahertz CW. That's the PCS band. 5, proposed coverage drive test at 100 feet, 800 megahertz. 6, proposed drive test 1900 megahertz at 100 feet. 7, proposed coverage and drive test 120 feet, 800 megahertz. And finally, number 8, 120 feet, 1900 megahertz. So we're all on the same page. So I guess let's take a look at number 1. And I'm only going to address, as I said before, the 800 megahertz results, or 850, so don't get confused if you see different things. So what is that? That's showing the calculated coverage as that green underneath. Do you have those on the computer? Maybe that would be easier. Then the audience can see them.
Right.
They want to. Maybe they don't want to see it.
No, if we have them, we should show them. Yes, please. Mr. Lutton, there's a full screen mode that can be enabled on that. If you go up,
Go to view.
If you go up to the view option there, see it
Go-
on the menu.
yeah.
On the menu.
Yeah, then
Click that
go down
and
to full screen. Right there.
yeah, there you go. Bingo. And you just hit escape to get back out of that. So
Okay. So
no, it's fine right now. Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
So this is number 1.
number 1, the green C stuff around here is the calculated coverage that exists in the area. And I will assume now that that's calculated coverage from, and clearly it is, it's from this site way down here. It's not from this site because that site, and help me if I'm not, that site is a vapor site, right? That's not even on the air?
That site does not exist.
Okay, that's a proposed site. And then here was the church, which isn't on. That's the one that we were waiting to see.
In fact, actually,
No, the
this
church
is
is,
the church.
yeah, the church is up there.
This is another proposed site.
Oh, okay. 254 is the church, okay.
So
And then,
I'm sorry, so the church in the simulated is not on?
that's what you just saw tonight.
Right.
That's the confusing part, right? And that's why I said, hey, we should see the church on these.
Because we don't need the church actually to be on to show it on the simulation, but it's not showing up on the simulation.
Right.
Okay.
That's what I asked for.
Right.
Okay, so,
Is it on or not? Is it being simulated as being on here or not?
The point of the prediction being overlaid on this plot is to compare what was the case at the time the drive data was collected. And at that time, the church was not on the air. So when we did the prediction, to compare the results of the drive, which you can see on there, with the overlaid or underlaid prediction,
Right.
if we had shown the church being on the air, it wouldn't have correlated in any way
Okay.
because it would have shown coverage in the prediction where there was no coverage on the ground because the site still hadn't been approved.
that's fair.
Okay.
That's fair, but it doesn't help in the final analysis. That's
Exactly.
why I
Because
asked
right
for it.
now, they're asking us to look at the actual situation where it is
Yeah,
there.
and the purpose of these was to try to demonstrate what the minimum height necessary to give them the relief they needed. So let's take a look. By the way, that's the proposed site. There's the search dot. And if I made a ring around that, as they do, but I can't because it's not mine. But there's where the site is. That's where they thought it should be. There's where the other site is. Here's where a site is. So remember what Mr. Eagleton said? Uniform spacing between sites. Would have been nice. So let's look at this. The green now is minus 75. Remember, a different number than you saw before, but it doesn't matter. And look how the green comes out here, goes a little further, is in here where it shows less of a signal strength, goes down here where it shows less of a signal strength, goes here where it shows less of a signal strength, but not significant. One would generally state in a review of this that the model is, believe it or not, somewhat understating the coverage that you'd get from the site, just a little bit. By, let's see, the scale is a half a mile, so that's an eighth of a mile, so we're talking about maybe a couple of eighths, maybe that whole thing might be a full quarter of a mile difference. And then you also see some stuff out here. And indeed, by the way, there's nothing coming down from here on this map because this is a measurement of the site itself.
Right.
All right, so can we now overlay the proposed drive test? You have that next, right? Not yet. No, at 120. I know it's backwards for me. I always start with the best and then go down. Okay, so that's the coverage from the site at 120, at 800 megahertz. Note once again the dearth of new coverage up here, in there. You see coverage here, no doubt about it, and you see coverage significantly down here by, where's the church? Here, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was my question, because I've got minus 75, minus 85 right down to the church from this site at 120 feet. But here's the thing that I asked for that I didn't get, and I bet you can't do this. Can you split screen this? Can you go on the? Can you go to tile? On the reader, and then put both up at the same time?
My computer, so
Oh, you can't. Okay, so if you did, this is what I'd asked for, an overlay, because this is important. I want you to see this. Could you just bounce back and forth? Here, try to remember something. Watch this. Okay, look at the coverage provided at 120 feet. It runs all the way past this site. We didn't do a lot of roads. It runs down here in car coverage. It runs here as solid coverage.
North Street, right.
That's where it's getting. Now, go to what, can you put them both together now?
No, Fowler Road, sorry.
No.
Existing plus the drive overlay. You didn't have that? I don't remember.
no.
No. So go back to then existing drive, scan drive. Okay. Now, go back to the other one. That's what I want you to do. Flip back and forth between the two, so the board can get an idea. Try to remember.
So we're flipping between 1 and
Okay.
7?
1 and 7.
1 and 7.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you can do it better on your desk.
Yeah.
That's what I did. I tried to tile it on the computer.
Yeah, okay, we got 1 and 7.
Okay. Now, if you could take those two and overlay them, and then look up to a strong light if you could, but you can't, because the pages are too thick. You'd see that this site, where it's located, duplicates the coverage of the existing site, this one,
The one at the shipyard, yes. Yep,
just about 40%.
right.
Provides just about 60% new coverage, 40% old coverage.
Right.
Okay. Typically, when one designs a cellular system or any type of PCS system, you name it, we look for overlap because we want someone to be able to be handed off from one cell site to the next. As they're driving down the road and the signal gets weak, we want them to see a stronger cell site so that the call can be seamlessly handed off and they have complete coverage. And the number that a good designer uses is for 10% overlap. Why 10%? It ensures sufficient time for the radio to measure the other signals, for the cell site to look for alternates, for all of this magic to happen so that the call can be handed off. And at typical driving speeds on roads like this, with 10% overlap on a cell site that's covering 2.5 to 3 miles, you got plenty of time to do that. When you get to 40% overlap, here's what happens. You're in the middle of that overlap. You're right here. And he talked about something interesting, and it happens even worse here. He was saying that, oh, the guys that are coming from up here, you're going to be talking on them, and it's going to be confusing or whatever. Well, when the cell phone is in the dead center of this, it's looking at two cell sites that are providing nearly identical coverage. And what happens is it says, oh, go to this one. No, go to that one. Go to this one. Go to that one. And it spends a considerable amount of time trying to hand off between the two cell sites. Number one, creates interference because remember in these systems, frequencies are also reused. Not necessarily in the LTE system, but in this system that we're depicting, there is a reuse. So we may have a damage to the precious use of spectrum because they only have so much spectrum, number one. Number two, to waste a cell site to duplicate 40% of the coverage isn't good engineering practice. And number three, it may cause destructive interference ultimately to the system. So that's what I base my opinion and fact on, that the cell site is too close to the existing one, and the fact is further demonstrated by it's nowhere near the search dot, because it would have been better up there. But it's here, so this is what we have to look at. So,
excuse me, when you say the search...
Oh, and by the way, oh, gee whiz, he got me on that one. Not 80 feet, 120 feet. Gets even worse.
Can you...
Would you put 120 up?
Can you just give us your, a working understanding of the search dot? What does that represent?
When, I mean, I can tell you how I understand it, or I can tell you on how I heard it in testimony last night, or in hundreds of other meetings that I've done. What would you like?
How you understand it?
Okay. When a carrier determines that it has a gap in coverage, and remember that these systems are driven perhaps monthly or bi-monthly by what they call their network performance group. That's the can you hear me guy. Except he's in a van or a car that has a GPS receiver, it has a cell phone, and it has a very sophisticated data recorder that takes continuous readings of the system as it drives around. And it's measuring that, and then they prepare maps like this, number one. They get calls from irate customers, big-time users who are saying, I cannot make a call when I'm up there and I'm going with Verizon. Or they get a call from someone saying that this is, it just isn't working, and I get all this static or interference or whatever it is. So they take the customer complaints, they take data from their switch that says lost handoffs. In other words, the switch will tell them when a handoff fails. I'm in one cell, and I'm trying to drive through another, but there's nothing there, so the call failed. They get that data. That shows up in their call detail record, it's called, the metadata. I'm not sure that the NSA is looking at this, but they certainly are. They have that data, and they also have the data of the drive test. They look at all this, and the engineering department says, my gosh, you know what? I think we've got a gap there. So the engineer sits down and he said, okay, if I have to fill this gap, and by the way, he's blind to zoning, and he's not blind literally, but he doesn't know zoning. He doesn't know topography, really. All he knows is, I got a hole. So he sees the gap, and he says, and he looks at the other cell site layout, and he says, okay, I got one here, and I got one here, and let's see, I want equal distribution. Okay, I want one there. Nice, equal, or, not this one, forget that one. Here, here, and there. I want one there. So he draws a dot, and then, because of the precision of this whole process, and he knows that a real estate specialist, our friend who's here, cannot necessarily find that location. He gives him a ring of a 1/4 mile to a 1/2 mile in radius. A 1/4 mile, yeah, 1/4 mile to 1/2 mile in radius, about a mile in diameter sometimes. That's in a big cell. And he draws that circle on a map. They give it to a real estate professional, a guy who knows about zoning, who knows about land use, and who knows about buildings and topography. And this guy goes out and he searches and searches and searches for sites in that area. He then brings back to the engineering department a set of candidates. I found this site on 5th and Elm, and I found this site here. And by the way, it takes 3 things for a site to work for a carrier. 3 items. It has to be zonable, it has to provide the coverage, and the guy who owns the property wants to lease it to me. If you don't have one of those, you don't have a site. So the real estate professional has identified 3 sites in the search ring. The RF guy then takes the search ring and he says, okay, let me calculate propagation from these sites. And he sees how that fits in with his drive test. And he'll go back to the real estate guy and he says, you know, 2 of these look pretty good. So then the real estate guy goes back out and he knocks on the door and he says, hey, we want to rent your site to build a tower, to put something on your roof or whatever it is. And that's pretty much the process of locating a site. Now, if the guy rejects them, 2 of them, he goes back to engineering and he says, I can't find anything. So then engineering says, well, okay, let's expand the search ring a little bit. I mean, that's like the one we saw in Woburn. The search ring is almost 1.5 miles long, and it's narrow and it juts around because they couldn't find anything, so they expanded it. But I don't know where it is. It was never shown. And it's always nice to see it, because if the site isn't in the search ring, it's immediate grounds for dismissal. No, not really, but it's immediately grounds for saying, well, why isn't it in the search ring? And the reason typically it's not in the search ring is because they couldn't find something. So what do? They go to what I call low-hanging fruit. They pick the easiest site that they can get, a guy who really wants to rent something because he's going to get rich on this, and they say, here it is, I got a site. And there you go.
So the search dot is ideally the center of that circle.
And I think the testimony says that that's the search ring. So since it has no, and as I say, a ring is a locus of points that describes an area.
Sure.
And there is no locus of points here, there's only one point.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
We have a distributed antenna system sort of bylaw in Hingham. Would a carrier like this consider that type of equipment for an area like that?
You know, I'll be very honest with you. I'm not a proponent of DAS, distributed antenna systems, unless it's in dense urban areas where the coverage is such that it would take a limited number of nodes. Nodes are the antenna spots, the points, to provide the coverage. And typically to do that, you'll need lamp posts or sturdy power poles or something that you can mount, because, you know, DASs aren't invisible. There's 1 or 2 antennas, and then there's, do you have FiOS here?
Yeah.
Yes.
You see those FiOS boxes at the bottom of the telephone poles that Verizon does? Yeah, well, the DAS box is a little bit smaller than that, except it's higher up on the pole. It's not on the ground. So they have that issue of being able to locate somewhere. The other thing that you need to make a DAS system work properly is you have to be able to interconnect all of these nodes. And typically you interconnect the nodes with special fiber. You just don't use the, oh, I get my cable on this fiber. They need a high capacity fiber to interconnect all these nodes. And also the area that we're talking about here, the area that needs the relief is somewhat large. I mean, if you had a, just like I went into downtown today, the 2 little streets, and if there were lacks of coverage in there, indeed, a DAS, you could have 4 or 5 nodes. I mean, to cover this area, and Mr. Lawton might have more experience or more ideas on that, it would take many nodes and an incredible amount of trying to find space for them to get them to work. It is complicated. But in the urban area, the central part of town, if there is a lack of coverage, a DAS system would work very nicely. But I don't, it's my opinion, it would not work here very well.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I interrupted you when you were doing your presentation just for that question on the search dot. Did you want to just resume?
Oh, was I saying something? I guess I was, yeah. Oh, yeah, I talked about low-hanging fruit. Yeah, I did that already. Okay. I did talk about then, I questioned, even in this report, before I said this, he talks about the different thresholds for its new LTE network. That's the one that wasn't on the air, so they didn't do the measurements, but we haven't seen any evidence. There's been nothing presented in this case with respect to 700 megahertz LTE. But he still talks about that, but he doesn't talk what the thresholds are. In Paxton, for example, they're talking about LTE, and they're talking about minus 93 dBm. We're talking about a really weak signal. And I'm still trying to get them to explain that. I mean, I know why, but they can't explain to the board, because the board says, well, you said it's minus 82, why is it minus 93? But it doesn't get any bigger because of power levels and the fact that it's a spread spectrum kind of system. But we still don't know what the LTE are, but I'm just answering his response, because it really doesn't matter, because this isn't an LTE application. And then I finally say that the drive test and scan tests, proposed location at various heights. Okay, this is what we have to cover. Okay, so now you saw the coverage that comes. This is going to be an important part, I think. Drive test at 120. Can we go to drive test at 100 feet? Okay. 800 megahertz CW. Try to remember, or take it out of your pages. Yep. So that'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Or 5. 1, 2, 3, 4,
It'll be
5.
It'll be 5.
5.
This is the 800 megahertz.
Oh, 800 at 100, sorry.
Yep.
At 1900, you're right.
And I'll leave it to you to see if you see a significant difference. Go back and forth between the two sheets, between the green and the blue.
Between 5 and 7 is what?
No, between
Between 1 and 5.
yes. No, not 1 and 5, between.
Between 800 megahertz at 100 feet and 800 megahertz at 120 feet.
100.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that would
that's
be
5 and 7.
5 and 7.
So we're taking a look at the differential that 20 feet makes on the height of the
Correct.
antenna.
Right, and this is with drive test, not calculated. Remember, I had previously mentioned to your boards that the model probably isn't very good at resolving a 10 or 20-foot difference. It's not accurate enough, but the drive test will. So I'll leave it to you if you find any areas that you find significantly different.
Yeah, it's pretty similar.
Basically only over the water.
Right.
Well, they can't be over the water because they didn't drive the water. You're just seeing the blue of the overlaid.
The lines.
I'm looking at here versus here. That's
Yeah. But this is the proposed coverage, the blobs,
Yeah.
if you will, and the lines are the drive test.
Yep.
And if you compare the two drives.
Don't look
right,
at the
right.
solid.
the colors,
Yeah,
right?
right. If you compare the two drive test results, they're substantially similar
Mhm.
at those two heights.
But to put it differently, looking at the area where they would assert that there's a gap in coverage, is that gap narrowed going from 100 to 120 feet? I'm looking and I can't tell.
My opinion is there's no difference.
Okay.
Right.
Now, go down to 80 feet. Could you go down to 80 feet?
It's number 4.
Which would be number 3, I guess.
I think it's 4.
It's number 3.
3?
Yes.
Oh, yep. I still keep looking at 1900, at 800.
Yep.
Now,
Yeah, yeah.
and compare that against, once again, the requested height of 120.
3 and 7.
And could you show us with your laser pointer where you're focusing your attention on that map?
Here,
Yep.
here,
Okay.
here,
Bear Cove Road, yeah. Broad Cove.
here. The tentacles.
I'm Lincoln.
Go back to, I mean, you can do it yourself. Go back, look at the tentacles at 120 feet.
Mhm.
By the way, this is fun, too. They drove this area. This is CW. This site is putting coverage down there, but, and they'll say, well, we need the coverage down there. Well, that's why I said, hey, what's this guy going to be doing?
Right.
Because that site, as you saw tonight, puts coverage down there.
Yeah.
I just focused on the tentacles, and my
Okay.
my opinion there, examining plots 1 and 2, one may determine these are the scan drive tests of the existing systems operating at 800 megahertz in 1900. Underlaid on the plots will be the results no longer utilized by the calculated coverage plots. Plot 2, let's go to plot 7. Plot 7 appears to be the measured 800 megahertz drive test of the proposed site at 120 feet overlaid on the calculated propagation plot. The site provides significant coverage to the east, west, and north, the good news. While the measured results do not agree with all the calculated coverage plots, see all the blue calculated overlaid with green measured. I already pointed that out to you. Could it be a result of the wrong clutter? I don't know. Please examine plot number 1, existing coverage, and plot number 3. Try to overlay plot number, you've done all this now, we've done that. And then the remainder of the plots depict measured coverage of the proposed at 100 feet and 80 feet. For this report, and perhaps better left to the actual meeting, a detailed review of these is not necessary at this time. Nonetheless, a quick examination of plot number 5, 100 feet, 800 megahertz, and plot number 3, and that, boy, that's, how did I do that? That should be 120 feet at 800 megahertz, along with the original plot 7, sorry about that, demonstrates a significant amount of difference, save a reduction in the inefficient overlap. One can take away a lot of information from these plots. The proposed location is in the wrong place. It is too close to the existing site and does not provide significant new coverage to the area of the search. The difference between 120 feet and 80 feet at 800 megahertz in providing coverage is insignificant. The coverage in the area at 1900 is not ideal, and notwithstanding that no gaps in coverage significant were noted, the proposed location does not provide meaningful new coverage relief to the 1900 megahertz system at the proposed location. That was the result of this, that at 850 megahertz, it didn't matter what height it was. So the net sum there is, should you decide to approve this, 80 feet is just fine to satisfy the needs of the cellular by the data that you have here, by the drive tests that you have. Now, if you're concerned, now remember, the tower company, they don't want an 80-foot pole, they want a taller pole to add additional carriers.
Right.
That's how they make their money. At an 80-foot pole, there's not going to be a heck of a lot of room at 70 feet and 60 feet to have this work for anyone. So the downside to that is you could get another pole in town, somewhere else if someone came in. The alternatives there, but the only applicant here is AT&T, and it's only speculation what will happen in the future, but it still is good to plan for the future. So good planning, although I'm not a planner, I would say that if you wanted to approve 80 feet, you would ask the applicant then to build a foundation and build the bottom supporting structure of the monopole with sufficient strength so that it could be increased in height in the future should someone come by and justify the fact that they need 90 feet or maybe 100 feet. What I'm saying in this instant application, it is my opinion that with the drive test shown at 850 megahertz and this antenna configuration, 80 feet works fine.
Okay.
Notwithstanding the pole's in the wrong place. But that's only if you want to approve it, which is okay with me.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Graves. Any other questions for Mr. Graves? I did want to raise the matter of timing with you guys. We've got another 4 items on our agenda, including 2 with the planning board this evening. We've got additional testimony, perhaps, from the real estate expert, opportunity for the public to ask questions. A little concerned with time, so.
Well, we have the real estate expert here, and I think the public has been very patient.
Correct.
I understand the issue of time, but have the public not be able to speak or respond, I don't feel good about that.
Right. I'm certainly not suggesting that. But
And I think at some point, we need to be in a position to close the record and move forward.
correct.
And not have people keep coming back for meeting after meeting. And in the context where we are, my understanding of the law is that the burden really is on the applicant to make its demonstration. And we are not obliged to keep extending
Correct.
time so they have additional opportunities to meet that burden. So I would like us to be in a position to hear whatever has to be presented and get this resolved.
Okay. Planning board want to stick with us then, or?
Are you on the Herb Chambers Lexus next?
Yes.
Yes.
Together.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh.
we are.
Yeah, sure.
Should we tell them what's going on?
Could you just let them know, Mary, that we're running late? I think I see them in the hallway.
Right.
But I agree with the comment. I think we probably
Okay.
should get the expert in here for a little bit.
Okay. So at this point, can we hear from the real estate expert then? And on his testimony on the effects of the tower on property values?
Do you think that it's more appropriate perhaps to go to Mr. Lawton based upon what Mr. Grafe was saying?
I mean, I think if we could have an efficient commentary and rebuttal, I think now's probably the time to
Sure,
have it, yeah.
okay. We are agreed then.
So, in the interest of time, I took a bunch of notes. I found a number of factual errors in Mr. Grafe's testimony, but a couple of things that I felt were important to clarify and correct. The frequencies that AT&T operates on, it's in fact pairs. It's not a specific frequency block. The uplink frequencies, which are from the terminal to the tower, are 806 to 824 megahertz, and the downlink frequencies are 851 to 869 megahertz. And in each one of those, there's a 45 megahertz gap between them, and there's each one is a pair. There seem to be a lot of things and comments and confusion and all those, a lot of stuff that really didn't make a lot of sense to me, but I'll try to go specifically to, again, as I said, a couple of particular things. Mr. Grafe said something about antennas, and they could use antennas that would work for 850 megahertz or 1900 megahertz. In fact, all the antennas that AT&T installs at this time are capable of supporting all their frequency bands: 700 megahertz, 850 megahertz, 1900 megahertz, and WCS, and 2100 megahertz. So that's not an issue, and any kind of comment about, well, you need to use a 1900 megahertz antenna is no longer relevant. That was the way it was 10 years ago when people started using 1900 megahertz. When they first gained the licenses, there were some antennas that were only capable of doing one or the other. But at this point, it's a network operations limitation to have an antenna that won't work on some of your frequencies. As far as the frequencies go, the thresholds go, the neg 74 and neg 82 was described as being inconsistent. I personally testified over the last year probably 50 applications in Connecticut, and neg 74 and neg 82 have been the thresholds that AT&T has used in all of those applications. So there's no inconsistency there. There may be inconsistency from what was filed previously on this application, but AT&T's current standard is clear. There was another comment about a 10% overlap. I'm frankly not sure where that comes from. There's no such thing in any kind of engineering discussion. I will agree with the fact that the site's in the wrong place. I would dearly love for this site to be at the school, but the school's not available. So we go with what we have. The issue about the duplicative coverage and ping-pong interference, that's an issue for GSM. AT&T's not installing GSM in any of their new sites at this point. So there is no ping-pong handover. UMTS works as a spread spectrum technology. The 3 or 4 strongest signals that the mobile or terminal, as we call them now, receives are simultaneously received, and in fact, that's called the active set. And if a site or if a signal is in the active set, there's not a hard handover like there used to be with GSM, so there is no ping pong. The sites that are in the active set will remain in the active set, and that actual, what used to be called interference in the GSM world, is actually beneficial. It provides improved performance in UMTS. So there is no ping pong interference that was described. And the last thing that I needed to correct was about LTE. Right now, as I said, AT&T is deploying all their new sites that they build throughout all of New England, I'm sure. I can't say the country because I'm not involved with the rest of the country at this point, but I know the Northeast region, New England in particular, all new sites are being deployed with both UMTS and LTE technology. This site, notwithstanding, it would also be deployed with LTE as well. The reason this application and the plots focus on UMTS is because this has been pending for some time. Were we here filing a new application before you today, it would be an LTE application. But UMTS is required to is still required to be present on the tower because at this point there are not terminals, or again I use the word terminals, it's the new term for a mobile. We don't call them mobiles anymore because they're smarter, they're smartphones now. There isn't a terminal made that supports voice on LTE at this point that's available to the public. So if this site were to launch with just LTE today, there would be no voice service provided by it. If the site was to launch with only UMTS, the data rates would be low. So AT&T in this time of transition launches both, builds sites to both technologies, and LTE in this area will be deployed on 700 megahertz, eventually on all bands, because UMTS will be phased out eventually and LTE will take over. But that's limited at this time by the mobiles that we all have that aren't capable of handling a voice call on LTE. When those mobiles are available, it'll be, those LTE will take over, usage will go up on LTE, it'll drop down on UMTS just as it's dropped down on GSM, and before that TDMA, and eventually it will sunset like GSM has been doing in the new sites and is in fact being, there's an initiative in most sites in the Boston area to remove GSM equipment to allow space to put in UMTS, and then eventually, because the bulk of the customer base right now, because of that voice limitation, is still on UMTS, but LTE would be the future. And then I guess the final, most important thing is that, you know, we talk all about handoffs and this and that and the other thing. In terms of what we're here as engineers to do, and what I'm here as an engineer to do, is to present to you why this site is needed. And I think it's very clear, 800 megahertz, there's less of a concern, but AT&T can't operate a network with just 800 megahertz frequencies. AT&T needs to use the 1900 megahertz frequencies to provide service to the customers in this area. And you can see clearly, even though Mr. Grafe only wanted to focus on the 800 megahertz plots, you can see clearly, if we look at the 1900 megahertz plots, whether it's the CW, whether it's the coverage, whether it's the recent drive test, the old drive test, any plot we want to look at, the need is there at 1900 megahertz. And so whether the need is there at 800 megahertz may be somewhat debatable, but it's not debatable at 1900. And I think that's why he's chosen to ignore that. So from my perspective, I think the work is done. We've shown that at 1900 megahertz this site is absolutely needed. Is it needed? Would it be better placed in a location which is not available? Probably. I'm not going to argue that. But we can't build a site that can't be built. We need to build a site that can be built.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lawton. Any questions for Mr. Lawton? No? No? Okay. I guess at this time, we'd like to hear from the real estate expert.
Good evening.
Yeah, thank you.
My name is Andrew LeMay, L-E-M-A-Y. I work in conjunction with John Lopes at North Star Consulting out of Cambridge. We were retained to complete a study or provide a study to answer the question on whether or not the ability to see a cell tower or to be in close proximity to a cell tower, to answer the question that the question would be, would the visibility of a cell tower from a property impact the value? That's the bottom line. That's the question we're trying to answer with this study. I believe the board has received a copy of my report. I will not read it to you, I promise.
Thank you for that.
I just want to touch on a few things. We have, in the report, we have 8 examples of properties that we've researched and verified in Massachusetts that have varying degrees of exposure to cell towers. Either they're very close to them, or you can see just the top of a tower in the distance. So we have a bunch of examples. In the New Hampshire section, we have another 7 examples, again, with varying degrees of exposure. Some towers are behind properties, some are off to the side. It's a pretty good cross-section of the types of exposure you can see from different types of towers. We've done a lot of research. I think in Massachusetts, we probably looked at 35 or 40 possible sites or sales around towers to try to find some that, number one, you actually could see the tower from the property, and number two, it was a valid sale, and we could actually verify the sale with one of the parties to the transaction. That would either be the buyers or the brokers that were involved, because sellers, once they sell a property, they kind of disappear. We don't know where they went to. So we mainly deal with the buyers and the brokers. Now, the brokers help set the value for the property when it's put on the market. The buyers ultimately determine what the property's worth. That's how we approach this problem, or this issue. The advantage of having multiple examples is you can take a look at the photo simulations that are presented for any particular tower site and kind of look back and forth and see if there's any similar type exposure illustrations in our report, and we find that this tends to work fairly well. Now, in the New Hampshire data, I've got some one section I'd like to show you because I think it's kind of important. On page 58, 59, there were some properties in Wyndham, New Hampshire. And these are it's a nice bedroom community, and there was a cell tower that was proposed. And we did some research.
I don't know who's doing that.
We did some research to try to find.
Emily, it's you.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
We had some sales that some properties that were fairly $700,000 or $800,000, $900,000 properties that had a fairly large tower across the street up the hill. It was pretty clear that it was in the view shed. To reinforce the fact that it didn't affect the value, not only did we talk to the buyers and the brokers, but I also went out and tried to find comparable properties that a potential buyer would have considered when they were looking at these properties. So on page 59 and on page 59, you'll see a spreadsheet. And this particular property is on 10 Orchard Blossom. And that, in fact, the very top line says Tower View, yes. And then there's 2 other properties, Heritage Farm and Ryan Farm Road. And those did not have exposure. If you go through the analysis or the comparison process, you'll see the bottom line between these properties shows that there's really no large difference between the value paid for the property with exposure versus the property without exposure. So this is the type of analysis an appraiser would have in their report should they do an individual property study on a property to determine whether or not there is any kind of impact from a cell tower. Now, in addition to researching the sales in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, we also did a national survey. On page 69, there are 3 questions that we asked in this survey. The first question is, have you observed or are you aware of any loss in residential property value due to the presence of a cell tower? The second question is, have you observed or are you aware of any appeals filed within the last 2 years claiming property value loss due to the presence of a cell tower? And the final question is, have you observed or are you aware of any property value loss due to the ability to see any part of a cell tower from a residential property, regardless of the distance? And without exception, the replies I received were no. The market has not reacted in that way to this particular visibility issue. Now, I included on the following pages the actual comments I received from the survey, which you've probably looked at, so I'll pass by those. The final section around page 75 is some additional information. After we spent some time developing this research, I went out and I tried to find other reports that have been written studying the same issue. And I've reproduced pieces of the report to give you the essence of their conclusions. There's 11 reports here, and the earliest one was in 1999, so it's about 24 years ago, I hate to say, because I remember 1999 pretty well. But these reports are from all over. They're from Massachusetts, Connecticut, Delaware, everywhere. So we've got appraisers across the country that are looking at these. I recently attended a seminar through the Appraisal Institute where they had a gentleman out of, I believe he was in Tennessee, and he is also studying the problem. He was doing search rings. He took a cell tower and he started to do search rings out, and he was tracking sale prices as it went out from the search ring. And the thrust of his seminar was, we're not finding any demonstrable evidence to show that if there's a cell tower, the buyers are going to react negatively and prices are going to be depressed. Now, what's the conclusion you can get from this? My conclusion was there's basically two types of buyers. There's buyers that will buy a property regardless of whether a cell tower is there or not. They want the property, they get good cell service, they don't care. There's other people who don't want to see a cell tower, and absolutely they're out there in the market. But the prices paid for these properties is not impacted by whether or not a cell tower is in the view shed in the research we've seen. So that's basically the thrust of what we have for you tonight. This type of research, by the way, would be done or should be done by any appraiser that is doing an appraisal to determine whether or not an individual property has damage. I did eminent domain work. My CV is in the back of the document here. I did federal highway eminent domain work for about 18 years, and my life was before and after appraisals. What's the property worth today? What's the property worth tomorrow after whatever is happening happened? And my brother currently is a reviewer for the state of New Hampshire, and he's still immersed in it. Thank God I'm not. But you have to have the data to either prove or disprove what you think may happen. And it's best to just let the data talk to you and show you what is happening rather than going with a presupposed answer. So that's basically what I have for the board. If there's any questions from the board.
I have a couple questions.
Yes, sir.
Are any of the properties that you looked at, were any of them within the fall zone of the cell tower?
I believe, yes, I think Mr. Lopes has one in the back of his, in the Massachusetts section. I believe it's a pretty crowded example.
What page would you direct me to?
Just a second here. Page 39. These definitely are not off in the distance.
This is the property in Medford.
And this is the property in Medford?
Yep.
And the information about it is on the on page 38. Now these may, if you look at the map on page 38, the tower behind the building is 109 feet, and the 77-foot lattice tower is across the street.
I was looking for a scale on that map so I could
Oh.
actually make the assessment, and there's no scale.
Yeah, I don't have a scale on that map.
So-
That's, I apologize, but,
Right, so I
Well, it
can't,
says up in the top here, the 100 feet west of the 77-foot
Oh, okay.
lattice tower,
I'm sorry.
and 200 feet south of the 190,
So they're not,
109.
so they're not in the
they're
folder.
not, they're
Okay.
not that close.
Right, so is there?
I don't think, well, let me just take a look.
Property could be within the 77-foot. I mean, I don't know if the
Well,
100 feet refers to the property boundary or the actual
doesn't say.
house, right?
It doesn't
right,
say.
It doesn't say.
I don't recall anything that was right on top of a tower. I've done research in Maine. I have a whole section for Maine as well. But what does Maine have to do with us?
Well, for purposes of understanding what's in the record, I couldn't see anything where a property was within the fall zone.
No.
Okay, and then my second question is, what is the average height of the cell towers for which the properties were affected that you studied? Was it around 100 feet? What's the average height of the cell towers?
In my research, they vary.
In this study?
Yeah, in this study, they vary from, I didn't average the heights because each one is an individual. I can tell you that,
Some of them.
well, we have a 77-foot one
Yeah.
we just
Right.
talked of,
Yeah.
and then
Right.
there's a 490-foot tower in Wyndham. That's on page
295 feet.
50, 52, 53. That's a 490-foot tower.
Okay.
It's on a ridge, and you see that tower?
So on page 50,
I'm sorry, 53, there's a photograph.
I'm just trying to find the map.
Oh, the map,
That would be on
be
page
at
50?
page 52.
On 52.
Most of these larger towers are quite a ways away from most of the buildings that I found that sold. This one was 490 feet or something away, but it was up the hill.
Yeah, the 490-foot tower, right, there's a 460-foot tower that's
Yeah,
described.
so you go
on page
from a
52.
70, we've got a 77-foot tower in Medford, I think, and
Right, so I'm looking at the 490-foot tower.
yes, sir.
That is basically at least 3 towers distances away from the property.
Right, I have
So-
nothing in any fall
Okay, so
zone, if that's your question.
I'm trying to see if this was comparable to the situation we're facing here, where you've got at least one property in the fall zone, a proposed tower of significant height, because the larger the structure, the higher it is on the horizon, the more impact we might expect, and I'm looking for comps on it, and I just didn't see it in what you presented.
Let me just take a look. Let me just take a look in one other thing here.
If anyone else has questions.
No, yeah, but mine relate to methodology, so I'll look.
Oak Hill Road. No, the other one's a 300-footer that's 500 feet north of a parcel, so I don't have anything that's right next to a building that would be within the fall zone. I do not have any of those examples.
So a couple questions with regard to methodology. So the objective of the study was to try to identify any adverse changes in price associated with having a cell tower within what you called kind of the view shed from the property.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And you went back and looked at other studies that have been done throughout the region and across the country, or in your review of the literature. Did any of the studies use, what academics would call hedonic pricing theory or regression analysis to try to estimate a coefficient or a percentage change in value associated with the presence of a cell tower?
There was I think it was a graduate paper done in Christchurch, New Zealand,
That's okay. That's okay. That
I
would-
mean,
yeah.
that was the time, that was a study that was done with using statistical analysis.
Right. So the idea there is that the regression analysis would be able to answer the question, all else equal, is there an impact? Because as I look at your comps, and you can have as many comps as you want, and one of the things appraisers do is they make adjustments. You know, academics would call them ad hoc adjustments, you'd call them based on your experience. But, you know, we're trying to, within your methodology, you have looked at comparable sales and you've made some adjustments based on the size of the structure, but not, I didn't see it, you know, the size of the lot, or, you know, maybe the proximity to a highway that might affect value, there where one has that proximity, one doesn't. There are a lot of different things that you could hypothesize that affect the value of a house. You've picked, in your judgment, ones that you think are the most relevant.
The only, the main thrust is not to do one-to-one comparisons. I did that in Wyndham because I did have what I felt were reasonably good comparables on similar-sized lots.
Those are the three comps we saw for that?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Yeah, they were all in the same community, relatively the same age. They were pretty close, except for some of the features. But I understand exactly what you're saying. I'm also a certified New Hampshire assessor. I've been doing that for about 15 years, so
Right.
I understand your question. I can tell you from an assessing standpoint, I've been working on this project, working on cell towers specifically for about 10 years as part of my job, and we haven't seen any type of statistical data that would indicate there's any type of regression as one moves or change in values that can be solely assigned to a single feature, just because no two houses are alike anyway. But as far as even neighborhood rings, the neighborhood near a tower versus a neighborhood away from a tower, there are a lot of variables that you have to consider if you're going to do a statistical study, as you know. So it becomes kind of a monumental project, if you will, to try to determine whether or not something happened. What I did is I took an opposite approach. Rather than trying to create this huge analysis, this huge spreadsheet or whatever, is to go to the people that are writing the checks and buying these things, and looking at the asking price, and looking at it as compared to other prices of homes in the community, and the days on market. Some of the they're non-variables. They're either there or they're not. They're A or B. How long was this on the market? What was the asking price? What was the sale price? What was the drop in value between ask and sell? How many days on the market versus the average for this group in the community during that same period? And I thought those would be indicative. If there was an extended marketing time, that might indicate some buyer resistance, but there wasn't in the data that we found. And you know, I'm looking for sales all the time, and it's fairly difficult to find.
Could days on the market just be a function of getting some bad advice up front from a broker?
Not when the price sells for 80 or 90% of ask. If the price is way out of line, yes, absolutely.
Are these houses that you looked at situations where the cell tower was built after the house was put on the market but before the sale? Or was the cell tower a pre-existing condition, if you will?
The cell tower was a pre-existing condition, and we looked at the pricing and the asks to see how they fit with houses not exposed to cell towers in the same community as well, to see if there was any reduced asking price
Right, but if the cell tower pre-existed the transaction you're looking at, and so I buy a house from Todd, and there's already a cell tower there, and so I negotiate the price, I buy it, and now I'm going to sell it a couple years, 2 years later to Joe. I've already factored in the impact of the cell tower on the price, my initial transaction.
It's already been capitalized into the price.
So it wouldn't show up on the transaction you're looking at when I'm doing the sale to Joe.
Yeah.
So if what you were looking at was this transaction, it's not designed to capture the very effect that the neighbors are concerned about.
When the house you sell has that condition,
Yeah.
and the neighbor over here, a mile away, has a similar home, similar age, and his sells, and your prices are within 1 or 2%, that could, or even 4% or 5%. No two homes are identical, and if we really drill down and take a look at these, what I've seen in my research is that he may have an updated kitchen, you may not.
Right.
There's other things that come into play. And one would think that if you had, and I've talked to, I'm also a realtor, I've talked to hundreds of realtors about this stuff, and right off the bat, it's, oh, the value is going to drop 15%. So, well, what data do you have? Do you have anything you can show me on this? Because I'd like to see it. Well, no, but I know it will. And then the house sells and it doesn't. I do have some homes that were put on the market while there was a tower being proposed. And that's on page 60 of my, that starts on page 60. I have some examples again in Wyndham. Wyndham was a busy area. Wyndham and Greenfield, New Hampshire. And these are properties I happen to come across after I give you some dates and times on public hearings and what was proposed. And in fact, these sales are interesting because the parties that were involved with these transactions testified at a public hearing that they would either never buy a house or their house was going to lose a lot of value. And yet, when they sold their home, they sold it for 90, the home sold quickly. It sold for almost 100% of list value. And the price paid was, when you look at everything else in the community, it was competitive. It wasn't depressed. Okay? So, I mean, this is some of your live market stuff here that we also picked up. It would be lovely to be able to come in and give you 5 nice, clean examples where we had a house that sold, a tower went up, and then it resold, and we can show what happened. But there's just, the data is tough to find. So, so I mean, it's all my way of thinking. After being in the business 35 years, I know the best thing to do is what's in the buyer's mind, what are they thinking? And that's really what the appraisers are trying to do, figure out what motivated the buyer, what didn't, how did it affect them? And you get on the phone and you ask people, how did that, you can see a tower from that house. How did that affect your buying decision? I never even thought about it, or it didn't matter. These are the kind of answers we get. I asked the broker. It never came up in discussion. So, and I've asked listing agents, how did you adjust the price? Was there any change in the list price, in the ask, because the tower was, you could see part of a tower? No, we didn't think it was necessary. I mean, I have one listing that I found where the agent put, there may be a cell tower built in the future, and that's all the disclosure they put. And, as a realtor, realtors are required to have everything in the information. Nowadays, especially with all the regulations, you have to disclose everything. So the buyers, if the buyers don't disclose it and they sell a house, they're going to be in trouble. So they really need to be upfront with it. And it seems like it's an issue when they're being built, no question about it. But once they're up, the market doesn't seem to back away from this stuff in a measurable way. I haven't been able to find any change in it. So,
I would agree with you that the data that you might want to look for that would be, in your mind, good, convenient data, there isn't much of it.
Oh, yeah.
I would also say that because of that, it's hard to conclude that we have any answer to the question of whether or not a proposed cell tower will change the value of land. There are scientific ways of doing it, which are regression analysis with various statistical tests for statistical significance. That's sort of the science that's generally used and accepted, whether it's looking at the efficacy of drugs or this is, so there is science out there. I don't think that the data, there is a way to do it that can answer the question, all else equal. and all else equal might be, there's certain variables here that might make sense. How many car garages was it? How big was the lot? There's like you said, there's a lot of things that affect the value of a house. I think these comps are probably not necessarily up to that test, at least maybe for federal rules of evidence. I appreciate what you did, but I think there's, I don't know that we have enough data here to answer the question, in my opinion.
I guess in response to that, I agree with you that statistical information would be ideal. I also know that every time you, especially as an assessor, the city I work in, we have over 38,000 parcels. The program we have is huge to try to adjust for, room count, square footage. It's massive. And even with all that information, you only have a certain degree of probability. I mean, it's pretty good. The CODs and the PRDs and that stuff are excellent, but it takes it would be a huge undertaking, especially in a community like this. It's a very it's rich in history. It has a lot of very unique homes. It has some new homes in it too. And for instance, in this neighborhood, I noticed that there's I think it's an 80-unit apartment complex kind of up off the roadways and back. And then you have a bunch of homes down in the front. So it's a real mix in the community. And to try to do a statistical analysis on a cape that was built in the 1600s, and then there's a colonial down the street that's newer, and try to say, how do these, if we do a regression going out on those, we actually have to try to either adjust for all those variables to start, or we have to find similar properties and track those out. I think that's is that what you're thinking about?
Actually, what happened is the regression analysis would make the adjustments. The regression analysis would take the place of the appraiser in the sense of making those adjustments, and it would be able to tell you with some statistical precision whether or not you could reject the hypothesis that there will be no adverse impact if a new cell tower is built. So there are ways to do it. I mean, the town of Hingham does have a lot of this data within their assessing systems. You can go right to the assessor's cards, and it does, the town's data is pretty good in terms of capturing a lot of the kind of house and parcel level data that you'd want to look at.
Sure.
And create a dummy variable for those lots that had
That's exactly right.
the exposure to the cell tower. Now, that would be a way of doing it in a rigorous manner. Obviously, that it doesn't sound like you found that in your research. It doesn't. That hasn't been the approach you've taken. So, I thank you for your work. My personal opinion is that the data really hasn't spoken yet about whether or not there's an impact, and I think that there is a way to do it, and you're right. It would be a research project. It would take a little time, and it would, but it can be. I think it could be done.
Okay. Right. Okay.
Any other questions?
No, I think we're done.
Yep.
I think at this point, I'd like to turn it over to the long-suffering members of the audience and see if they have any comments or questions that they'd like to make at this time.
I was going to say, it's good to have an MIT professor when it comes to regression analysis.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, and I apologize for interrupting.
No.
Did you want to hear from the real estate consultants with regards to the search efforts that were made with regards to the proposed location of the site?
Well, I think we have some testimony on the record from one of the earlier hearings about the locations where you looked or the areas where you looked.
Do you have new information on that?
If there's new information, sure.
Well, I'm not sure that we did not go through, I don't recall which exhibit it was with the application, but we were asked to present it. We put it on a KMZ file with regards to, on a Google file. We can bring it up, live. You can look at those sites. We could.
Yeah. Is that one of the items that we have as an exhibit that we looked at?
Yes.
Part of like the original application.
Oh, it's back in the original application.
I think it's back in the original application.
And it was maybe
That's what I was asking.
December.
So it's part of the record?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So it's part of this submission. Do you know what tab it is?
don't think it was updated. So it was submitted in that and then
20,
updated maybe for
Oh, no,
December.
that's his.
Don't tell me 20, this goes up to 8.
Well, I got one that goes to the 19 here, so.
It's Exhibit 10.
10.
And is this the updated version?
Remember, there's a spreadsheet and there's a map.
We do need to.
Yeah. Okay.
That's off.
Oh, so you have to hit the override.
Do we have any copies of this that we could look at?
It would be in that file. You found it?
This is the file that...
There, he's going to look it up.
So this, yeah, but there's like, got to be a list of properties.
Yep, it's the next one.
Okay. 30, 50?
So this is where
No, 40.
them to update how they moved it over.
I count 40 properties, so on your list.
Okay.
Do you have any additional copies that we could just make of the list that you're going to go through?
I can run them off quick too. If
That'd be
you wanna pull
helpful
that out. Yeah.
We might as well hear the methodology.
Sure.
Is these relatively standard, I think?
Okay. We can proceed with this, yeah, if you would, yeah.
Okay, this is a joint effort amongst a few of our members of the team, so we'll
Okay.
start with Steve Kelleher.
Thank you. My name's Stephen Kelleher.
We already know that you're going to have to raise the mic.
Oh, right.
I was going to say, thank you, Joe.
Okay, so my name is Stephen Kelleher. I'm a consultant on behalf of Global Towers, and in this particular property, I was tasked with finding a location in the given area, given AT&T's consultant had indicated that there's not an available spot to co-locate on. This particular area was, I mean, you guys live here, simplistically, anything to the left of the yellow line, the yellow pin, was indicated to me to be too close to an existing site. Those were automatically eliminated.
Okay, so what is the yellow pin?
So the pin is the proposed location for the application that we're for today.
Okay.
And so everything else in that cluster, ideally the school was the ideal location. And AT&T had already indicated that the board was not interested in putting an RFP out for that location. So once that got eliminated, there was really...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
yes.
The yellow pin is the current proposal.
Right, this is right.
So, but that's not where you started.
No, well...
The search. So what I'd like to know is where did you start the search so that I can understand how you wound up there?
Right, so what I received from Global, which would have went through from AT&T, was that the ideal location was the school, and then...
And where is
School's
that?
around
I'm
K.
sorry, the school is K, I'll try to be more specific.
Okay,
The school
so
is
the
K.
goal was to be around K.
Right.
Okay.
And then I know that AT&T had spoken to 14, right, Jackie? Yeah. And then N, which would be the apartment complex.
Okay.
Which,
The reason I thought the gap area was further up on there, and
this is where the school went, AT&T originally.
Okay, that's a downer
that
school,
would have
right.
Would have been ideal location to close the gap.
okay.
Correct.
And
But where is the gap that it would close? In other words, I assume
we've already went through
but if
all
we
this.
can put that
Yeah.
on the map so I see where it is in relation to the property search.
Right, I don't know.
Yeah, that is what I'm looking for. Where is the search dot?
The original...
There's no overlay. That's what you're asking.
Yeah.
Well, he can give me a ballpark. Where-
Who's red dot was it?
So where is, so where's the search dots?
The dot that was...
That wasn't mine, that wasn't me.
Okay.
It's a very serious matter for everyone.
Yeah. That's a green one.
So, right in there.
Okay.
Was the, if you go back to the plots that we had done.
Sure.
That had the black dot.
Yes.
That would be.
Approximately that location.
Okay,
Okay.
so K isn't the center of that, your search is actually that search dot, which is
Well,
high.
And I wouldn't have received the search ring, I would get the search ring after any co-location efforts by AT&T were exhausted, so when I'm looking at the area, driving the area, obviously, and I, in my head, called it a peninsula, but up towards the water, past the school, that whole area, I mean, there was no viable properties, and if you guys know from living here, that, and everything up there is residential except the 14.
Except for the yacht club,
The yacht
which
club,
is 14, right.
And then moving down to the school, which is K, and then N, those, and 14 really didn't even have enough space, even if they wanted to, there wasn't a lot of usable space over there anyways, the yacht club for a tower.
So why did you not look in residential?
Well, from a zoning perspective, I mean, it's not even something that would,
This application is for a residential location, that's what
well,
I'm
a
asking.
residential use, I guess is what I'm,
No, this is a residentially zoned location that you're in.
it's not a residential use, the property itself is a commercial property.
Right.
But I get your point
Okay.
as far as this, so what I try to do, and we were up in Woburn last night, and obviously the ideal site is, 500-600 feet away from any residences, fall zone,
Yep.
no visual impact. The school would have accomplished some of that, but outside of that, every other spot in the area, to the right of the pin, even the apartment complex would have had some sort of negative impact. So once I got into it, as far as there's a lot of wetlands in this area, so in looking over all the properties that I did, and I think Earl had a wetland guy come after me to verify that most of the other properties that may have been big enough were wet or saturated or unable to build. So after I eliminated those properties.
Let me just, so I understand, when you say wet or unable to build, are you saying from a structural standpoint you couldn't do it, or because of conservation concerns? you couldn't?
State regs, local regs, even from a construction standpoint.
Well, but I'd like to separate the construction standpoint from the regs, because we're in a
Right.
proceeding
Well-
where you're looking for a waiver of regs, and if other locations would be available, but for regs, regulations, we could consider waivers of those as well. So
Right.
I'm only asking, are there areas that you ruled out simply because they were too wet for construction purposes?
No.
Okay, so-
It's, to me, I don't generally, from a construction standpoint, if we have a question on construction, I'd have my
Sure,
construction. guy come.
that would make sense.
But when we're looking at the particular area, that cluster of parcels that's next to the proposed site, there's a lot of residential, there's some commercial use, properties in use, but all of them were small, really tight parking lots to the wetlands, right abutting the wetlands. So they just weren't even considered because they would lack of feasibility because of the amount of space we would have needed, would have taken up either most of the parking lot, or there's a gas station there. So, go ahead, Jesse.
I can help. He's talking about areas here, Broad Cove, these areas, these large, expansive, wet marsh areas. These things that look on the map that look very attractive. These are the areas he's basically ruling out because they're completely wet, and it would be, basically impossible to permit anything in there. And these are marsh areas that are basically not built, and provide flood storage and floodplain and those kinds of properties. That's what he's getting at, is that these areas here are all small residential areas, very small lots. And then these other areas here, Broad Cove, these other areas.
And I can actually
Here.
zoom in, if we can
Are all-
eliminate everything to the left of the pin, I can.
And even parts of our lot, if you remember the shape of our lot here, this area in here is all wet, the entire thing. And in fact, on our property, this was all flat, this area here. It was all flagged along here. This whole area here is wet. This area here is all wet around by the the school.
Yep.
You know, this area here, all wet, these areas up in here. So those areas, the parcels that were large enough for him to consider putting a tower and to have the, you know, minimal variances and setbacks and things, those near the search ring, the center of the search ring, that weren't these small, tiny residential parcels. He's saying that these are basically ruled out because they're huge, large, expansive wetlands. And the folks that came behind him to do that were the same folks that flagged this site here. They came along and looked at all these different areas here to make sure that they were in fact wet. And that would create, you know, multiple issues for siting the tower.
When you say wet, are you referring to the state wetlands restrictions or our local bylaw restrictions?
State, local, and floodplain.
Okay, so I asked, are you referring to state or local? Because that makes a difference.
They were sort of considered together.
I mean, the reason I ask is that to the extent that it would have satisfied the state and there were local bylaw issues, that is an issue that would require application to a conservation commission to see whether or not there could be a variance, similar to the request for a variance from this board. And so I'm trying to understand what the decision process was to go for one type of variance versus another type of variance.
I can tell you that these large areas here that look attractive to site a tower away from are entirely wet. Would be federal wetlands, state wetlands, and of course local. So I mean, I see what you're getting at. Maybe there's a spot that you could permit it, you know, federally and state, but local would have some kind of a buffer.
Exactly.
If that type of thing wasn't considered, you know, we're looking at areas that are completely wet, really not buildable from a large regulatory standpoint.
But actually, north of the school is not wet, correct? Isn't that a ridge?
Yes.
Right. But
Yeah, that's not wet, right?
Up in here, I believe this is part of the school property, so I believe that once the school says no, and they wouldn't entertain the RFP, I think that would end.
Right, well, yeah, right.
Okay.
Be the town that would say no, right?
Right.
So yeah, there may be some spots here, but
Maybe this is school.
part of the school parcel, and
Okay.
they're not willing to issue the RFP, then this whole area here becomes
Unavailable. Okay.
Could you just collapse the scale a little bit, because we sort of lost even the search dot to begin with.
You want to zoom back out?
Yeah. Just zoom it back out a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Do you want to continue?
Well, I mean, for this particular area, my work wasn't, I shouldn't say it wasn't difficult, but there wasn't many options for me to consider. The lot in question, from what I recollect, the owner had multiple, there's a few parcels under common ownership. He was a willing lessor, and really, it was the only spot that would even make sense if it worked for RF to even be able to attempt to go through zoning with, given what's out there. So for me, it wasn't, you know, obviously it's an obvious site, and our Mike said it. I mean, it's not an ideal location for anybody. Obviously, the property owners as well as for us, there isn't. But this is really the only site that was available. It was submitted to RF. It was accepted, and then the leasing process began.
Good. It's good for the record, right?
Yeah.
Did you contact, let me ask, the lettered ones, are those people you contacted and to see if they were available? What do those letters represent?
Well, it's just sites that I had looked at that were not, anything in the area that was non-residential of use, I looked at just to rule out. I was out of my car, back in the parking lots. I spent a couple of days in the area.
Sure.
Obviously, ideally, we could have went over to the industrial park. That would have helped out a lot, but I mean, it's right across the street from the existing site, and it wouldn't. So then, when we moved closer to, moving back up Lincoln, I mean, really, there's only one location that, if it was acceptable to RF, that would have even been worth trying to lease, because everything else just wasn't feasible
So
outside of the school.
As I understand it, did you contact the school to see if they would do it?
AT&T had that originally.
Okay. But other than the school, were contacts made with anyone else?
Right, so AT&T had contacted, as I mentioned, the yacht club, the school, and the owners of the apartment complex, from what I understood it to be.
It's actually an assisted living complex.
If you could give your name.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
we just need your name.
I'm Jackie Swenson. I'm site acquisition for AT&T. And we looked at the school, approached the business manager there, and we were turned down. We went to the yacht club, which we had a willing landlord, but we could not find a place on the property that was constructible to give us the tower height that we needed, to give us fall zone and not intrude on the residences right next to the yacht club, basically.
What's the height you could do at the yacht club?
Well, we couldn't get high enough, basically, because of the hill. There's a hill on,
Malcolm Road.
Yep.
Merrill Street or whatever.
Right.
that whole area is sort of a hill, and then it goes down
Yeah, right,
to the
yeah.
yacht club.
Right,
So
yeah.
basically, we're trying to get everything behind the hill.
Yeah.
So we'd have to get up over it. So, I mean, we'd be 150 feet, 135 feet to get over that hill, which just wasn't feasible. So what was referred to as the apartment complex was actually part of the Welch, I guess it is, healthcare system. There's an assisted living center.
Yep.
Allerton House.
And Allerton and also Harbor House. And the local management seemed to be very interested. However, the national people, it's a big organization, they voted it down.
The national people who own the...
That own, yes.
Okay.
that own
Right,
the
Welch.
facility, yeah. And at that point, we started going a little further south, and we found out about the GTP tower and their investigative work, which was going on simultaneously. So that's how we got to that point.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Does anyone have any more questions for me on that?
Let the audience speak.
Right, I think we're good. Is there anything more that you want to present, or at this time?
No.
Okay, thank you. Then now we're going to move on to the long-suffering members of the audience. If there's anyone here that wants to ask a question or make a comment, please come up, identify yourself for the record, and ask away.
Stanley Fogelman, 5 Bulow Road. I'm still confused about something. So your consultant said that with the tower in place, the new tower in place, there will be a 40%, approximately 40% of overlay with the existing tower. And yet the AT&T consultant said that he doesn't see that overlay. So I'm just a little bit confused. So in other words, you're going to get 60% more coverage with the new tower, which is not significant. And so I'm confused there because we've got two experts saying two different things, and I'm just wondering, can they meet somewhere in the middle so the rest of us can understand? Thanks.
I'll ask Mr. Lawton to respond.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is, goes back to, is the site in an ideal location? And I think for a number of reasons, it's not. However, if this site is approved, AT&T, there are ways, there are measures that can be taken with the antennas, orientations, down tilt, that can reduce the signal propagating to the west while still maintaining the signal propagating to the north and the southeast. So the concept that a site by its very nature is unsuitable because it's too close to another site. Sites are needed to provide something, not to not provide something else. And I guess my distinction that I would make there is, I got to take this down again. These sites over here, I think in the original search, it was identified that they're too close to an existing site. And, well, yeah, they are, because the smokestack, I can't really see it in the picture here, but I think it's kind of like right here. So they're quite close to this smokestack. But as an engineer, that doesn't necessarily, in my view, rule it out. If a site over here was able to provide coverage over here, well, then it would have been a good solution to the problem. But the reality is that a site over here, like the smokestack that's up at, I believe it's 167 feet, AT&T has their antennas on the smokestack. Even at 167 feet, a site over here is not providing coverage over here at 1900 megahertz. So it's, you know, it's not a question so much of whether the site location has an overlap with another site, because when the site is designed, when the engineers actually do the final configuration of the site, they can select antennas, they can select down tilt, they can control the RF propagation from that site to mitigate any overlap to the adjacent site.
But to answer, I think, the abutters or the neighbor's question, is it, if we ignore the down tilt or whatever you can do, is the calculation correct that there would be approximately a 40% overlap? Not saying whether that's good or bad, but is that 40% about right?
I can't answer that because I didn't do that analysis. I didn't look at, you know, calculate a percentage. And I would also say that we're talking about something that would never actually exist, right? Because if AT&T were to build this site, the propagation from that site would not be the same as what we saw on the omnidirectional CW test. AT&T would choose not to, for lack of a better term, choose not to send as much signal in that direction because it's useless. It's really not helping anything. They would reduce the signal propagating in that direction while maintaining the signal that was propagating in the useful direction. So is the analysis of a 40% overlap correct? I don't know, because I didn't look at that. I didn't statistically, I can't say it's 40% or 50% or 30%. But what I can say is that if this site is built, it won't be 40%.
Okay.
Can I respond?
Yes,
Just
Mr.
so we
Gray.
have-
Yeah.
just so, the gentleman was looking for some type of agreement or some type of, I mean, the fact is that what Mr. Lawton is now proposing, quite frankly, is to eviscerate the site. Everything that you've seen with respect to a 120-foot monopole with a 12-foot triangular platform with 8 antennas, 12 antennas. We're going to tilt that down, or we're not going to have antennas there. He's going to eviscerate the site, make it provide no coverage to the west, because notwithstanding what he said about ping pong effect, he didn't tell you about in the spread spectrum system of UMTS, there's something else involved that causes pollution within that overlap area. But I'm not going to get into the technical issues. It was a nice answer, fine. My ping pong answer works for GSM. UMTS is different. Notwithstanding, there still is destructive interference, just of different name. Yep. So he eviscerates the site. So any proposal that you're seeing, just throw out, because it won't be like that, nor does it have to be like that. So, and as far as the overlap, the evidence shows 40%. Once again, if the applicant would like to change the application and show you something else to consider, then perhaps they should do that. What we've got is a moving target, and I can't keep track of the moving target. I can only deal with what's presented to your board. And the fact is, 40% overlap with the site the way it's proposed. If they want to propose something else, then perhaps they can come back to you and propose something else, and you can decide if that makes sense or not. And one other thing. The AT&T person, someone must know where the original search ring was and how big it was. And I'd still be delighted to see it on that map, and then blow up that map and see if you can find anything up there. They've looked for it, fine. Where is the search ring? We know there's a dot. How big was it? None of these sites, and that came up last night, none of the sites they considered were ever in the search ring. They moved it around. So where was it here? Once again, it's a matter of the evidence in this case. And if you want to go to 1900 megahertz, fine. And if that's how you want to justify it on 1900 megahertz, then do that. And stop moving the mark. And with those plots, I'm sorry, Mr. Lawton submitted those plots. And notwithstanding the fact that he says these are the new signal levels, hey pal, you submitted them. So you want to change it again? Fine. I can only look at the evidence presented in this case, and it keeps changing.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sir? Behind you, Tony. And then,
Bob.
Yeah, Bob. Then we'll get Tony.
Bob Higgins, 11 Bulow Road. I have a question for AT&T, actually two questions and a comment, a quick comment. The service area that they're trying to improve up there, how many complaints do they have from their existing customers for selling data up there? And have they turned down any new customer requests up there because they were unable to provide selling data up there? And if it's marginal, as I think it might be, I would suggest maybe, is a device that we can put in the homes, a remote type of an antenna or reception, perhaps a small dish indoors, out of the way, so that we don't have to look at it from the outside of the building to remedy that. It just seems that we're going through a lot of rhetoric here for a minuscule problem, and I think we can resolve it. But I would like to know the answer to that first and second question. Is this what's driving that? Thank you.
Is there anyone who can answer that, or?
I guess it's a question for me, but I don't have any access to the customer complaint database.
Okay.
So I can't answer that.
I know that, I know that on the second part of the question, is there any in-home solution to improve signal coverage? I know that the AT&T stores actually sell those things. My son got one, and they work. And is that well, I guess, would you respond to that question?
I think you're referring to like a femtocell or something, they call it? Yeah.
There's a number of different technologies, and I think it goes back to the what was referred to before. I mean, they're a similar type of thing to a DAS. It's a small installation that's intended to provide. There's a number of different ways that they work. You can hook them, some of them they hook up to your local Ethernet, some of them they take over-the-air signal if it's a business use. There's also outdoor solutions like that, but they're intended to provide service to a very particular area, someone's home. And in this case, if there was a particular home of a resident that had an issue, then it would absolutely be a perfect solution for them. But I think the issue that we're trying to solve is not just one home. It's a fairly significant, large area of a number of homes. And that type of installation, the MiFi or a picocell or whatever you want to call it, a private cell in your home, wouldn't really resolve anything other than the issue in your own home.
Do you know how many homes are affected by the gap that you're asserting?
We can calculate that. I didn't calculate that. I can calculate it using WebInfo pretty simply.
That'd be great.
Okay. Tony and then. Yeah. Whichever. I have no strong preference.
My name's Mark Turnak, and I'm one of the abutters. And I was curious, we've looked at this map focused on with the new tower proposed site in the middle. But if we moved the map to look at where that black dot was in the middle, could you potentially light that area they're concerned about from Hull? Because there's no problems beaming signal across water. We heard that that's coming from all the way from Dorchester, and we're getting signal into that area. To me, I would think that if there is commercial or very large parcels of property across the water, that would be something that should have been within the search ring, and we've heard nothing about that. And if we measure from where that dot is out to where the tower is, that's a good 10 feet on this map. Have we looked at that far in all directions, I guess is my question.
Yeah, and that is exactly what I'd asked before. Do we need to look on the other side and what's out there? And I guess maybe that would be something for the AT&T search people. Did you look to the area on this map, which would be east?
On the east side of the harbor and over towards Hull, so.
From the, specifically since Hull was mentioned, I know AT&T, there is a ODAS on Hull, ODAS, outdoor DAS, on Hull, and AT&T is actually tenant on that, and that's how AT&T provides service to Hull. But the beneficial thing, if you will, about Hull is that it's a long, thin strip of land. So it's really an ideal situation for a DAS to provide coverage there. There isn't, other than the wind generator on the very end, I don't believe there's anything of height along the whole peninsula, really, other than homes, and I think there's a hotel out there.
Can you add a tower to a windmill?
I have not heard of it being done. I know that towers or sites have been located in abandoned windmills, but not in functioning ones. Not that I know of. There may be some, but I'm not aware of any.
So maybe my point was perhaps misguided there. I didn't particularly say that Hull was the answer.
Right.
I was saying that were there heights that direction,
Yep.
that we're examining.
Can you, if you can expand, increase the scale of that?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah, that's great, thank you. So there are islands out there that are uninhabited?
Right. In general, to the east is World's End.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we're going to have much luck putting something there. And obviously Hull going up.
It seems like the ideal location would be in that peninsula, down, pull out a fantastic beach, up higher. Right there.
So yeah, he's referring to.
Just guess why that wasn't before.
Yeah.
So I guess.
Yes, that Sunset Point section.
The threshold question is, was that looked at and rejected for some reason?
I don't believe so.
Well, we've got the site folks here.
I wouldn't have looked at it from my perspective. I don't know, because it just wouldn't even, that's a pretty good distance away from the search ring. But I don't know if AT&T
Right. Well,
for a tower, for a good tower,
Yeah.
I would look 5, 6 miles, whatever it is, away outside the search ring.
Same distance to where the tower is now.
So
It's probably about a mile away.
you've now referred a couple times to the search ring. Could you show me what you think the search ring is?
When I get a search ring, I don't work for a carrier, I work for a tower company.
Sure.
Carriers have their search rings, and they exhaust them for co-location purposes. Typically, the carriers don't build their own towers, sometimes they do, but, so when I get it, I get a list of what didn't work, who they contacted, and then I get our own area from Global Towers, which I would have gotten, which necessarily wouldn't have been exactly where AT&T's ring would have been, because AT&T's ring had been exhausted at that point. So when it got shifted internally, Global, when they were Global, had their own RF guys that would help, I'm sure, help move it. But, so from my perspective, I would look at the area as a whole. I wouldn't have looked at another, that far away from where I was projected, but I can't speak to AT&T as far as the process that they did originally.
Okay, thank you. Tony?
My name is Tony Viola, as you know. We've sat patiently by as a neighborhood for meeting after meeting, continuance after continuance since October. And some of us are really foaming at the mouth to be able to put a presentation together to talk about things like the search ring, talk about things like significant gap, talk about things like bright line responsibilities. And quite frankly, we haven't really been given a formal opportunity. So I would ask for your indulgence, perhaps at the next meeting, to allow a group of neighbors to put a presentation together for approximately 1 hour or 1.5 hours to talk about the application at hand and the impact it has on our neighborhood. The other thing that we've never talked about as a group is zoning. I hope that comes up at some point in time. I have questions tonight for Mr. LeMay. I have questions for SAI. We have questions for all the representatives of AT&T and Global. Unfortunately, the time is getting late, and to do it on a piecemeal basis doesn't seem to be the most appropriate way to continue. So we'd ask if you could possibly set aside 1.5 hours for us at the beginning of the next meeting. We'll put a presentation together, something that like AT&T and Global has done, and hopefully we'll be able to air all of our concerns about the application.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tony.
Can I ask a question on that? In 1.5 hours for one presentation, we've had a lot of evidence introduced. Do you really think you need 1.5 hours? And if so, could you tell us why?
Yeah.
Mr. Duval has explained to you in a prior meeting that this board must base their decision on substantial evidence. The only thing that's presented thus far is AT&T. We have not been able to produce any evidence and show it to the board to the contrary. Mr. Graves has done a wonderful job in analyzing the applications, but he is not producing models. He's not producing anything that is significant evidence that can be going to a court and be able to hold up the decision that you make if it is in the negative. So we're going to produce some additional evidence, and hopefully you will be able to rely on some of that to make your decision.
Right. And would that be given to the board a week or so in advance? Because as opposed to like springing in on us the night of? Seriously, if you want us to
seriously,
if you want us,
we will put
to review
a package together in advance of the meeting, if enough time. Although we do reserve the right to send it in 4 or 5 days in advance, like AT&T has over the course of the time. But with all due respect, yes, we will get it into you as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Well, I think we should ask the applicant, I mean, their reaction to that, rather than sort of doing piecemeal back and forth, having them make basically the neighbor presentation so you've got it in a more unified way and can respond accordingly. Does that make sense to you?
The applicant has no objection to that. I would also, though, ask that we receive a copy of that presentation in advance as well.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. Okay. John? Yeah. Sir?
Tony Marston, Trinity Low Road. At the February meeting, I asked a number of questions, and as far as I know, Global Towers never responded to any of them. Can we expect some sort of response at some time, or I hate to be redundant?
You can. Do you want to repeat them so that?
Sure. The first one was that the site engineer, I think his name is Mr. Marino, stated that we live in a 120-mile-per-hour wind area, yet a memo from Sabre Towers and Mr. Tyndall to KME Radar, I think, in Global Towers, stated that the tower is rated 110 miles an hour wind speed. The next question, especially given the fact that AT&T is at the top of the tower, and it would have to be extended if somebody wanted to reach that same area beyond, and in light of the 2012 Tax Relief and Jobs Act, can that tower be extended? And if so, how high? And at its maximum height, does it still capable of lasting, 120 mile an hour wind? My guess is the higher the tower goes, the less possibility. And then there was the issue of ice throw, and asking for data or whatever methodology they used to show that any ice throw would stay within the fall area, the reduced fall area. Those are questions.
He's got it.
Okay. And then we'll take you.
This is final.
Joan Nevins, 9 Tupelo Drive.
You can tilt that down.
I just wanted to present an additional 89 names on our petition that we read at the December meeting. And we have some additional names too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am?
Hello, I'm Christine Viola, 8 Tupelo Drive. Just kind of a comment. From what I'm understanding, looking at the maps we put up earlier of how the coverage will change if this site is developed, it seems to me that the area that's going to get improved is the neighborhoods where all of us live and none of us really want it, and it's not going to solve the problems out at the end of Crow Point. That's just kind of a general comment. The other thing I'd just like to bring up, Mr. Grape, you talked about, I think you called it a stealth pole, where everything would be inside. And I'm wondering if AT&T proposed that to the school. Because if it was a flagpole and it was enclosed, did they know about that option? And maybe that would be something they'd be willing to look into, especially, and did they know the economics of it? My kids went to foster school. I know they could use the money, so just a thought.
Okay.
We did propose that, that's not what we did propose. What's any stuff?
And that was to who?
The business manager, I don't have his
David
name.
Calori?
Yes.
Mr. Ferris. It was
John
actually
Ferris.
Mr. Ferris.
Oh, Ferris?
Yeah.
Calori's still there?
And was there a letter ever written? A letter ever written to the school or to the superintendent of schools or solely?
To the school committee.
One individual that happens to be sitting at a desk.
We solely went through him, he was a coach from the school board.
Right, so I guess the question is there a written communication that documents?
Did it go to the full school
the-
committee?
No, but was there a written request from AT&T or whomever to,
No, these were verbal conversations.
okay,
We never got to a proposal. We asked him.
I understand you didn't write a proposal, but there was no writing about even an inquiry?
No. Okay.
Okay,
Everything was verbal.
thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
While we're on the topic of alternative site plans, we kind of glossed over these wet sites, and I think it's appropriate to look more specifically at these sites and see if there is sufficient upland to build, specifically the pumping station as an alternative. So I don't really accept, sort of the glossing over of, all of this area is wet. I think each site needs to be looked at more carefully.
So you're talking about the sewer pump station at the
Yes.
at the corner of Downer and essentially 3A, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Procedures, gentlemen. If we're going to consider the abutters presentation, we're talking continuance. Planning board needs to do site plan review.
What I'm going to recommend, subject to the input from my board, is we break off from you, and we continue our meeting to a date certain on Monday when Mr. Chessier is available.
Right.
And then we work through site plan in the A3.
That's great.
Obviously, the zoning board will need our site plan review before they make their decision.
On the A2.
What do people think about that?
Fine with me.
Right.
And I would offer that if the neighbors would like to come and do a presentation with respect to our site plan review criteria, which is on page 9 of our bylaw, we would certainly hear you out before we make our decision. So do we have a date, Mary, we could look at that? I know our engineer is available on Mondays, I believe.
Every Monday in June is available for Mr. Chesia. It's the board's availability then.
Is there a June 16th date I was thinking of?
There is a June 16th.
We have a proposed meeting. How about June, would the applicant be available on June 16th?
I'm not available.
You're not available?
June 9th?
End of June's fine. We're no. We've been liberal with continuances for them, so they can be, unless.
I don't think I'm available, but that's okay.
We could do the 2nd. Do we have anything on the 2nd?
I'm not available that Monday, but so one of the two.
Monday the 19th?
Sure.
That's only 4 days. You want to do the 2nd, you're not available?
But you can still do it. I mean, if 4 out of 5 are available, we can do it.
Which is the second of June?
I don't think I'm going to be around for the last week in June.
If four of us are available, then we should do that day.
On the 2nd, the 9th, 4 of us are also available. Are 5 available on the 9th? 4. And the 16th, are 5 available? Do we have school?
Oh, Sarah's not available.
Yeah, that's okay, but if you're not available on the other day, we'll just stick with the date we have the meeting already proposed, which is the 16th.
Do you want to go for the
16th.
Is the applicant available to that?
Sorry, we're just talking about another.
Monday, June 16th?
With the planning board for site plan. And we'll have Mr. Chesia here.
I was just going to say, I think between last time and this time, Mr. Cheshire submitted a letter saying that all of his issues were resolved.
Well,
He had some issues.
he had
with
some suggestions. Right, but if I think our preference is to have in-person testimony.
No, that's fine. I'm just
So I
trying
think
to
that's what we're
make
gonna
the
do.
point that, for the record, that all of his comments were addressed to his satisfaction.
So it should be a short meeting.
It's just our consulting engineer, that's not necessarily our, review.
No, correct,
Okay, great, thank you. All right.
Do you have a date?
16th work for the neighbors?
June 16th,
All right,
okay.
and June 16th is 7
That's going to be for us too, or not?
No, we're bringing
Do we need a written request by the applicant to, so council could,
That, just
just planning board,
yes.
and then you can go from there.
So let's pick our dates.
So June 16th is planning board, so we
Right.
would want to do it after that.
So unless you're looking at doing 2 meetings in 1 week, you're
No.
tied up the first week. You could potentially do something the week of June 8th, though you have self-image study group that week. And then you've got another meeting the 18th. I don't think I'm going to be around the last week in June,
And
if that matters.
remember, I'm going to be going from July 9th to the 20th.
Okay. So there's that first full week of July, starting July 7th. Unless you wanted to do it soon, like June, the week of June
I prefer
9th.
June if we could.
Yep.
Yes.
So what about the week of June 9th? It's open.
I can do that anytime.
I am tied up on that Wednesday,
Okay.
unfortunately.
And you're tied up on that Thursday, so then we're looking at Monday or Tuesday.
I can do either one.
Tuesdays are fun.
I think Monday would work for me. Monday, June 9th.
Okay.
Does that work for you, Todd?
Would the board want to look at the 23rd of June?
That works for me.
I could do that.
I'm still not back.
I don't know.
They went to the 16th.
4 board members that are available.
Oh, right. But what's the deal?
I don't
think it
matters.
I don't think it's a matter.
Okay,
Or
so-
the 9th.
So what are we looking?
Yeah, 4 on the
to do?
9th
June
also.
June 9th, yeah.
So we have,
Either one, the 9th, 23rd.
so we have Monday the 2nd.
Yeah.
Do you prefer June 9th?
And then that would be the next Monday. And you have Wednesday, the 18th.
Yeah, so that's two.
Oh, they're considering the 9th. That would be great.
Oh, yeah. Except for they have to be in 2 places at the same time. But
No. Follow it. Maybe we won't split.
Sorry, you're here on the 9th?
With the planning board thing.
When are you out?
I'm here on the 9th.
You
Okay, all
out?
right.
I think the last week in June.
Starting the 23rd?
23rd, yeah. You guys don't need me.
The 9th is a Monday, that's
Yes.
okay. And what if you have one on the 23rd?
We could do 9th. We could do the 10th.
I can't do the 23rd.
Can you do the 9th?
I prefer the 9th, but
Do the 9th. I mean, I won't be here on the 9th, but we'll do the 9th. It's fine. We have 4 people.
Yeah, if you guys do the 9th, we may just do the 10th.
Why don't you do that?
Yeah.
I can do the 10th.
Yeah, I can do the 10th.
Can you do the 10th?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Love to.
Okay, gentlemen, we're talking about continuing the zoning board hearing until June 10th. Should be a
No,
Tuesday.
they were the planning board. They will
Yeah,
be
the
there.
planning board's going to do the 9th. We're going to split. We're going to split from here forward. The planning board will do their thing, and then we'll come in. So we're talking about the next evening, June 10th? Okay. At 7 p.m.?
I want to ask the applicant something before this.
Okay. We have one more question for the applicant before we recess.
Yes. Since we have all the experts here, and I'm not sure who's coming to the next meeting, I just wanted to understand responses to two questions. Now, I understand that the proposed site is divided, basically there's a portion that's zoned commercial, and the back portion is zoned residential, and the proposal is to put the cell tower in the residential,
in the rear,
residentially zoned portion of the site. And so I guess my question may be for your RF engineer or for whoever else. Putting aside what the property owner wants, is there any topographical reason that you couldn't locate the tower in the commercial section? They may not want to lease it to you for that purpose, but is there something about the topography of the site that would prevent you from doing the tower in the commercially zoned portion of the site?
I haven't looked at that, but I can get an answer to that before the next meeting. I don't,
Right, so
I
this,
haven't looked at the property.
okay,
plan, no.
so there's going to be a second portion that goes to the RF engineer, which is whether or not, if it's put there, would it have the same effect of addressing the gap as where you've got it? But the first question is not an RF question. It's you know, could it be built there, or is there anything about the topography which said it just doesn't work in that location? Who would I address that question to?
Yeah, I guess we'd have to look at it. I mean, it's a little bit complicated to say off the cuff, but something we could look at the next time.
Okay, so do you understand? So there's two questions I'm asking. The first is there anything about the topography of the proposed site that would prevent you from moving the proposed cell tower from where you've got it to somewhere in the commercially zoned portion of that? I understand that you may have property owner issues. I'm putting that aside. I'm asking simply about the topography. And second, I am asking, if you placed it there, would it cover the gap as effectively as where you currently have it placed? Those two questions.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, topography-wise, the site is relatively flat.
I don't think there is any, but I just need to know from you if you think there is.
I cannot think of topography, solely topography.
That's all I'm asking.
That would preclude it, except if, you know, in the back of the wetlands aren't they?
Right.
Right.
And if you're talking about the commercial zone in the front?
Yep.
Barring all the other underground and other issues, topography-wise, I would not think that there would be topography would not be a barrier.
And whether, if you moved it, if it would have an impact on your coverage?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best way to address the question is maybe for him to take a look at the property plot and figure out where it would go. And
Right.
I can take a look at it from our perspective and make sure it's still
Okay.
the same.
Right.
That would be great.
Thank you.
Okay. So we've agreed Tuesday, June 10th, right?
At what time?
At 7 p.m.? 7 p.m.?
And so do we need any extensions on decision deadline?
Yes.
We have an existing extension to June 29th, but we could get another one.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty tight to get the decision drafted.
Okay.
So let's propose it, and then we can just, what makes sense?
Let's do a month for that.
So a month from that hearing.
Would that be okay to July 10th?
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
But we can get that in writing from you, or, no, we actually have these forms now, don't we? We actually have these forms. Okay. So, everyone clear? Planning Board, Monday, June 9th. Site plan review issues. And then June 9th, right? June 9th, Bill? June 9th. At 7? At 7 PM, and then the continuation of the zoning board hearing on right, the following night.
And the neighborhood will present on the 10th.
They will present us on the 10th. I mean, it's up to them if they want to present on the site plan issues to the planning board on the 9th. Okay.
I'm not going to be.
Okay, everyone. Right? Do I have a motion to continue?
I move that we continue till June 9th,
10th.
10th at 7 PM for the zoning board.
I'll second that.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Okay, we're done. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Herb Chambers?
Herb Chambers, they still here today?